The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Hey, it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Robert Draper's book, When the Tea Party Came to Town. And it was actually the original title of this book when it first came out was called Do Not Ask What Good We Do. And this is the only book that tells the story of how the Republicans got together the night that Barack Obama was being inaugurated and decided that for the next 4 or 8 years, they were going to do everything they could to destroy our first black president's presidency. And so I'm reading from the prologue, and he's talking about how Frank Luntz had organized that dinner that I was just mentioning. He was very happy about that. The dinner tables were set in a square. This was at the Caucus Room restaurant in a private dining room. It was a little restaurant down at the corner of 9th and D Street. The dinner tables were set in a square at Luntz's request so that everyone could see each other and talk freely. He asked that Gingrich speak first. Gingrich was happy to oblige. And, you know, it goes on through this. Pete Huckster said, so we're in the depths. And then we get right into it. They would take back that this was their plan. You know, what their party had done from 94 to 2000, what the Democrats had done from 2006 and 2008, the Republicans would want to do again. They would take back the House in November 2010. Then they would use the House as the Republicans' spear point to mortally wound President Obama in 2011. They would do this and retake the House and the Senate in 2012. They would do all this, but only if the American voter blessed them to do so. It made no sense they all agreed to attack Obama personally. He was too popular. Got to be about ideas, said Eric Cantor. Democrats now controlled everything and were already with a monstrously priced economic stimulus package showing their true colors. Given time, they'd screw things up, as the GOP had. But, said Paul Ryan, everyone's got to stick together. Ryan, a 38-year-old Wisconsin congressman and numbers fetishist, whose shiny earnestness recalled an Ozzie and Harriet America. Ryan hated squabbling among conservatives, the paleos versus the neos, the socials against the moderates, and on for as long as he'd been on the Hill, which was most all of his adult life. Ryan had long sought to be the Republican Party's glue, pleading for adherence to principles and data. At times, he looked like the underfed, hollow-eyed child of alcoholic parents. Well, the only way we'll succeed is if we're united, Ryan told the others. If we tear ourselves apart, we're finished. But, he added, he liked what he was hearing now. Everyone at the table sounded like a genuine conservative. It was a place to start. If you act like you're the minority, you're going to stay in the minority, said Kevin McCarthy. We got to challenge them on every single bill and challenge them on every single campaign. That's Kevin McCarthy. Luntz viewed McCarthy as one of the Republican Party's emerging stars, an easygoing, unthreatening guy who understood that language and appearance mattered as much as substance. Nonetheless, the polar and media guru interjected a cautionary note. One of the worst political performances I've ever seen, he said, was when the Democrats took over the House in 2007 and Nancy Pelosi shut out the Republicans and everyone whined about it. If any of you behave that way, I'll go on TV and hold you accountable. Luntz tended to get carried away, but everyone knew he had a point. Senator John Kyle began to focus on immediate tactics. He pointed out that Tim Geithner, Obama's nominee to be Secretary of the Treasury, had failed to pay his Social Security and Medicare taxes during his 3-year employment at the International Monetary Fund. Kyle sat on the Senate Finance Committee, which would be conducting Geithner's confirmation hearings the next morning. The Arizona senator intended to go after the nominee. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the approach I should take, he said to the others. There was a pattern here, Gingrich pointed out. Charlie Rangel, the new House and Ways and Means Committee chairman, hadn't paid taxes on his rental property income in more than 2 decades. Randall and Geithner would be wielding more power over how taxpayer dollars would be spent than anyone else in America. And then there's the web, chimed in McCarthy. There are freshmen who accept campaign money from Rangel. They're caught in the web. McCarthy suggested that they waste no time smacking down the New Democrats for the TAC ads. The dinner lasted nearly 4 hours. They parted company almost giddily. The Republicans had finally agreed on a way forward. Go after Geithner, and indeed Kyle did the next day. Would you answer my question rather than dancing around it, please? Show united and unyielding opposition to the president's policies. 8 days later, Minority Whip Cantor would hold the House Republicans to a unanimous no against Obama's economic stimulus plan. Begin attacking vulnerable Democrats on the airwaves. The first Democratic National Republican Congressional Committee attacks would run in fewer than 2 months. Win the spear point of the House in 2010. Jab Obama relentlessly in 2011. Win the White House and the Senate in 2012. You will remember this day, Newt Gingrich proclaimed to the others as they said goodbye. You'll remember this as the day the seeds of 2012 were sown. Well, not so much, but I'd say that this is when the seeds of 2016 were sown. Forgotten, or at least not discussed that night in the caucus room, was what had been sown in America by January 20th, 2009. That was the day the meeting happened, the day that President Obama was sworn into office. On that evening, while the ruling party celebrated in tuxedos and the minority party retrenched over steaks and red wine, U.S. unemployment rate had climbed to 7.6%, the highest such indicator of national misery in 18 years. Things could get much worse. Joblessness in America would exceed 8% the following month. By May 2009, the number would climb to 9.4%, and by October to 10.2%. And it goes on. It's a great book. Robert Draper, When the Tea Party Came to Town.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Still is a kid.
These, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. And so happy to be back home. Louise and I went to, I didn't want to go through the whole thing before we left, but it's supposed to be every year, but it works out like every other year. My youngest brother and his wife, and my third brother's son and his wife and their 2 kids, and Louise and I and 2 of our daughters. Our son was going to join us, but he got called into jury duty and he couldn't get out of it. We all get together for a family vacation someplace that's warm in March typically. This year it worked out the first week of April, and it was planned like 2 years ago because last year we didn't do anything. And we spent a week in Roatan, which is this island off the coast of Honduras, just, hanging out like 30 feet from the beach and having a good time. And although I did have my Sirius XM app on my phone, and we had Wi-Fi, so I was able to listen into Alex filling in for me. And Alex Lawson, thanks so much for doing a great job all last week, and to Troy and Chris and Nate for helping him out and making everything work here. But anyhow, I'm back. And, and I'll know in a week if I have malaria or Zika or dengue fever or chickamauga. Is that how you say it? Chikungunya. Yeah, those were after I'd gotten about a dozen mosquito bites, I was informed those are the 4 diseases they have there. Oh, boy. But anyway, I'm back. It was interesting. It was also interesting how many people, we were on the inexpensive end of the island. We were literally $85 a night for these little cabanas on the beach with no TV or anything. It was just wonderful. But so many people spoke perfect English. And I don't know if, I know there's a robust American expatriate community there. But also, I don't know how many were deportees or, schools there teach really good English with American teachers or what. But anyway, if you're thinking about an outside the U.S. tropical location to get to, Delta flies nonstop out of Atlanta, United flies nonstop out of Houston. Just don't be a doctor on a United flight that's oversold. I guess you've seen that ad. They dragged the guy off and knocked him out or something. Said, we'd like volunteers. We oversold the flight.
He's like, I'm not volunteering. I got patients to see in the morning. So they go in and they grab him and drag him out. Yikes. I have a feeling that, I mean, these are the things that PR people in big companies, especially airlines, just, it makes them pull their hair out. But that's not the biggest story about airline travel. There's a whole bunch of stuff, though, that I want to get into today. Let me start out with, while I was sitting on the beach in Roatan, the Donald Trump lobbed a bunch of Tomahawk missiles owned by Raytheon, in which he owns stock, which went up in price, into Syria, into an airport in Syria, which the next day they were using to take planes off and bomb Homs again. It seems to me that he's following in a long and fine tradition of American presidents that really started with Ronald Reagan. Arguably, it really started with Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher in 1978 became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and the first thing she did was break the coal miners' union. Now, the coal miners' union at that time in 1978 in the UK was the largest and most powerful union in the United Kingdom, and it was like, don't go near that. Those guys, they will eat your lunch. They got power. She busted them up, and but that hurt her popularity tremendously. And, her whole privatization thing and, all this stuff, it all started out with this. And what this led to was, as her poll numbers just went down and down and down, she was like, okay, I need a little war. So there's this little island off the coast of Argentina, the Falklands, that was home to mostly penguins. And Argentina and the United Kingdom had argued over centuries over who owned it. So she was like, okay, we're going to take this island back from Argentina. And, it took a couple of days, and it was no big deal, and it was a small war, and her numbers just went right up into the sky. So a year later, Reagan comes in, and he looks around, and he goes, okay, the things are, and within 2 or 3 years, he's had a recession, he's doing crazy stuff, he's being conservative, nobody agrees with it. Oh, let's wreck Social Security, let's, this, that, the other thing. And his numbers are in the crapper, so he decides that he's got to have a little war, so he invades Grenada. In fact, a friend of mine who was the assistant to the president, Maurice Bishop, was the president at the time of Grenada. And my friend ended up in Cuba for 4 years, hiding out, basically, after Reagan invaded Grenada. But that was his little war. And then George Herbert Walker Bush, he had to have a little war to get himself reelected and to jack his popularity up. And so he attacked Saddam Hussein after he told him, sure, go ahead and take Kuwait. Oh, no, we're not going to let you do that. Boom, 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 boom. And it didn't work out quite so well for George Herbert Walker Bush. As his son pointed out in 1999, had his daddy had a bigger war in Iraq that lasted longer, like right up till the election, he probably would have gotten reelected. But he didn't, and he wasn't, and so there was that. Bill Clinton got involved in Bosnia, although he was very reluctant. I mean, it took, I think, 3 months of just watching parts of Bosnia, particularly Kosovo, just being devastated before he did anything. And then, of course, George W. Bush comes along, and he's got to have a war. So he has his war in Afghanistan, and then he has another one in Iraq. That turned out really well. And now Trump has, this is his equivalent of Grenada in the Falklands, in my opinion. It's done a marvelous job of distracting people from the investigations into all the people on his staff, including the latest Jared Kushner meeting with the Russians. Oh, my God. And it's like everybody's hysterical about this. But, hey, we changed the subject. He got us off that topic. And nobody's talking about, how the tax cut policy that he's putting together. He does not want to do away with that deduction that allowed him to take $1 billion deduction or nearly on his taxes and not pay taxes theoretically for 20 years. We don't know because we haven't seen his returns. And he does want to do away with the one tax that he did pay for the 1 year that we do know something about, which was the alternative minimum tax. He paid $30 million plus on that. Oh, let's do away with that tax. So there's that. But after this happened, I mean, this happened while President Xi was here. And President Xi he's the guy, he comes from an affluent background. He knows how to conduct himself. He understands foreign policy. You don't get to be president of China by being an idiot. President Xi is no dummy. And so he just kind of let Donald Trump have his time in the sun and shook his hand and was very friendly. And in fact, said, "Oh yeah, we'll let you import American beef into China. But beef imports into China have been banned since 2003. Give Trump a bone, right? Literally, we'll take the T-bones." But once he gets back to the China, New York Times reports, Jane Perlas on April 8th, with President Xi Jinping safely out of the United States and no longer President Trump's guest, China state-run media on Saturday was free to denounce the missile strike on Syria, which the American president told Mr. Xi about while they were finishing dinner. Xinhua, the state news agency on Saturday, called the strike the act of a weakened politician who needed to flex his muscles. Every now and then, China gets it right. In fact, actually far more often than every now and then. In an analysis, Xinhua also said Mr. Trump had organized the strike to distance himself from Syria's backers in Moscow to overcome accusations that he was, quote, pro-Russia. The unflattering assessment reflected China's official opposition to military interventions in the affairs of other countries, but it was also a criticism of Mr. Trump himself, who Mr. Xi had hoped was a man China could deal with. Right. That didn't work out all that well. Meanwhile, and this is very troubling. This is stuff we probably should be talking to Stephen Cohen about, but we'll let this cool down for right now and see what happens. But a joint command center. This is by Peter Walker and Sean Walker in the Guardian on April 9th. A joint command center made up of the forces of Russia, Iran, and militias supporting the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad said the attack, this is Trump's Raytheon Tomahawk missiles he owns stock in the company attack, said the attack had crossed red lines and that these three countries, Iran, Russia, and Syria, would respond to any new aggression, and Russia and Iran would increase their support for their ally. And meanwhile, Boris Johnson, the British Foreign Secretary, has canceled a trip to Russia. Rex Tillerson is heading out there day after tomorrow. We'll see where that goes. But I think that the real key to this whole thing is this great piece that Trita Parsi wrote for the Huffington Post. He's the president of the National American Iranian Council, or National Iranian American Council. Yeah, but Trita Parsi is absolutely brilliant. And it's titled, Why Trump's Syria Strike Will Not End Well. And it really boils down to one thing. There is no plan. There's just no plan. By now, Trita Parsi writes, it is clear that the missile strike has not impeded Assad from using his air force to strike rebel strongholds. Syrian warplanes, in fact, reportedly, carried out strikes yesterday against rebel cities near the city of Homs, taking off from the very airbase hit by U.S. missiles. So Trump even gave Assad advance notice via Russia, although he didn't tell Congress. And this is where I'm with Bernie. I mean, Assad's a terrible man, and what he's doing in Syria is to his own people is, if nothing else, a horror and a war crime. But blowing up an airstrip without even hitting the runway, apparently, because the jets are taking off the next day. This was just, in my opinion, this was just Trump wagging the tail. I think he was trying to say to President Xi, hey, I'm gonna be a tough guy. Xi was obviously not impressed. And he's risking World War III here. And, this is the same guy who ran on a campaign of, no more stupid foreign wars. I mean, if you're really concerned, Donald Trump, about the children of Syria, stop the stupid refugee ban and bring some of them here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back. I've got a ton of stuff that I wanted to talk with you about all kinds of different topics. We'll go through over the next 3 hours. We'll also take your calls on pretty much any topic you want. Feel free to call. And welcome back. Let's see here. John in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I think all these issues, the issue of war, the financialization of the economy, the destruction of our political life by, very, strong moneyed interests, libertarians and dark money, can, really be summed up by listening to Michael Hudson. I've been listening to him on YouTube, and I think he offers a historical perspective that really shows how, our economy is being hollowed out. And so actually capitalism is, consuming itself. And they're consuming us because we're products of it. And so many people, including yourself, Stephen King, there's a whole body of literature and whatnot that describes this in very painful detail. But war is very much part of it. It doesn't serve any purpose really. It's not going to expand the economy except for Raytheon. Their stock price went up by $1 billion. Well, they increased their value by $1 billion, as opposed to right here in Minneapolis, we have Medtronic that sells heart pacemakers, and it just shows you how we value or don't value life, because they're only worth about $60 a share, and I think that Raytheon is up to $150, $160 a share. So this is how our neoliberal economy values us, values life. It's hollowing out even our cultural life too. We have no privacy. The wall that, I think in a way symbolically, the wall that's being built by Donald Trump is walling us in. It really is in so many ways walling us in, and we are going to, the middle class and everybody else, they're going to pick our pockets until we have absolutely nothing.
Well, it's a process that began during the Reagan administration. I mean, that was Reaganomics. Reaganomics was the declaration of class warfare.
Yep.
And you're right. Michael Hudson is a very, very smart man. He's been a guest on this program a number of times. I've quoted his work many times. Every now and then we disagree, but they tend to be on, kind of far out speculative conspiracy stuff, like who killed Kennedy. But
his economics, I think, is just right on. And instead of looking at a crash, he's looking at a gradual fleecing of us to the point where, everything will be, speculated, and there'll be no real productivity. So the thing is all going to fall like a big house of cards. And you can see that. I mean, bankers don't invest in new businesses. They invest in speculation, and even governments are into it. Like the city of Chicago now privatized their parking, and once they lose that, then people are paying forever, and that's the that's the neoliberal or libertarian view of things. Let's turn everything over from the commons into capital for us, and you create a rentier. They call it a rentier economy. And
time to read Henry George. And by the way, John, it's not just the United States. This is happening all over the world, and the pushback against these neoliberal policies are creating a massive crisis for republics, for democracies around the world. John, thanks a lot for the call.
On April
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them
in standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here
on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Thom Hartmann here with you. So we've got the whole Syria thing, and we can talk about that more if you would like. I'm not sure exactly what to say beyond what I already said. I mean, I think it's so apparent to me that there's no plan, there's no strategy. The reality in Syria is extraordinarily messy. Russia has a deep water port there. So, I mean, just flip this around and think about if there was a civil war going on in Qatar or the UAE. And by the way, there have been attempts, but they brutally put down dissent in those countries, and we support them in doing that, which Assad tried to do, and the Russians tried to support him in that. He was unsuccessful. He's got a civil war on his hands. But, in the places where we've got military bases, we wouldn't tolerate that. Or another country coming in. So you've got that, number one. Number two, you've got Bashar al-Assad is an Alawite, which is a kind of a variation of Shiism, and yet it's a Sunni majority country. And then on top of that, 100 years of Saudi Arabia funding radical Sunnism, Wahhabism, has infected not only that entire region, but literally the entire planet with this, 17th century strain, 16th century strain of Islam that is to this day being promoted with your and my oil dollars by Saudi Arabia. And it's just an absolute mess. And now Trump wants to insert the United States, and we've got soldiers on the ground there. I mean, shades of Vietnam in 1964. I mean, before anybody was paying attention, but we had advisors on the ground. So there's that. There's a crisis of capitalism happening too, and I want to talk about this at some length. And it's not just capitalism, but it's capitalism basically eating alive. First capitalism, big capital, eats small competitors, because one of the things that capitalism hates is competition. Free enterprise loves competition. Capitalism doesn't. Right? So first, and the only way you can guarantee competition is by government law, by things like the Sherman Antitrust Act. But Reagan stopped enforcing that in '82, so you got no competition in so many industries now in the United States that they can just drag doctors off airplanes. I mean, that kind of thing, number one. But number two, now we've got capitalism going after government. And I want to share that with you, what's happening in Britain, what's happening in the United States, what's happening in cities all over the United States, and what kind of damage it's doing too. But I see also a whole bunch of you wanted to get into the conversation, so we'll pick up your phone calls too right after the break. So stick around. Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann's back, hail hearty and well-rested.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And hopefully malaria-free. We'll be right back. Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading from Death in the Pines, a novel set in Vermont. You have to be crazy to do this on a morning when the Vermont winter sun shone pale and weak across 6 crisp inches of fresh snow. When the temperature hovered somewhere between 20 and 25 degrees Fahrenheit, I spent a long time searching for 10 stones. They had to be the right stones, of a certain weight and shape, heavy but not so heavy they exhausted me, rounded but not so much that they would roll from the place I set them. It took hours to find all 10 of them, searching in the sheltered places where the dry, powdery snow was easier to scrape aside. But then they had to be lugged to the spot I had selected, mindless beast of burden work that made me sweat inside my downline jacket. I stacked the stones carefully into a hollow, truncated pyramid. Anyone coming across that pile of stones in 10 or 100 years would know they weren't dropped there haphazardly by a retreating glacier. This was a made thing, too small to be a cairn,
too insignificant to be the remnants of a wall. I guess you could call it an altar. The ashes were in a bronze urn, far too small to contain the spirit of my friend John Lincoln. The container had stood on the shelf in my cabin for too many months. The new year had just arrived, and with it a belated first snowfall of the season, and the combination of the two had finally persuaded me it was time to do something about the urn. Holding it in the chill, near silence of the forest, I stood over the structure I'd made and looked off into the distance, seeing but not seeing the brownish shafts of pines streaked with snow, the bare gray trunks of maples, the white and gray columns of birch, the deep shaded greens of white burdened firs. At that moment, the urn felt heavier than the stones themselves. This was why I was here. The mind drifts at such times. Even after 6 years, I could recall the particular night that had caused me to travel to this place. On that night, my mentor, no, by that time my friend, John and I had been slumped in the rotting front seat of an ancient rusting 55 Ford parked in the heavy, humid midnight of Central America. Despite the choking reek of insect repellent, voracious mosquitoes whined in through the open windows, and from time to time we slapped an offender, reducing it to a crumble of tissue to be flicked off with a fingertip. Still warmer than blood heat even at that hour. The dark air sizzled with cicadas. We had left our home base in Atlanta a week before and had taken a circuitous route to this dark clearing hacked from the jungle. We were waiting for either 3 or 4 men to emerge from a blacked-out warehouse, and we had no idea whether those men knew we were watching or how well they might be armed. What we would do depended on how many came out. If only 3, we'd move in and recover what had been stolen. 4 would make the recovery problematic, because that would mean that at least one of the men would be a local, complicating the calculus of violence. As I stood over the stone altar, every detail of our conversation went through my mind. A tape rewound and replayed. By that point in our lives, John and I had been partners for so long that we didn't BS each other, had no need to strain for machismo, no use for phony heartiness. We were a good team. We could finish each other's sentences, catch body language signals that amounted to a silent code, recognize unspoken concerns and anxieties in time to be prepared for the unexpected. We told all our jokes to each other years before. Once in a while, one of us might mutter 2 or 3 words of a punchline. The other would chuckle in appreciation or exasperation as the mood took him. That night, in stop-and-start fashion, we had each spoke of good times we'd had. Waiting in the dark gave each of us a natural urge to talk. That was the one and only time that John had spoken of his quiet way in the forested hills of Vermont, thinking of the coolness of a New England autumn in that hellish tropic night. I'd never known that he'd been to Vermont. He had lived in Buckhead, a suburb of Atlanta, the whole time I'd known and worked with him. But in those suffocating hours of darkness, cool green Vermont was on his mind. Beautiful place, very peaceful, he said. I'd like to go back there when it's all over. I didn't have time to ask what he meant or what would be over. The job, the summer, the career, the life. At that moment, dim yellow light from a kerosene lantern appeared on the black face of the warehouse. First a line, then a thin rectangle, then a fat square as the 3 men inside pushed open the double doors. John and I climbed out of our borrowed car and did our job. In the 6 years that followed that night, John never had gone back to Vermont, had never spoken of it again. And now for him, it really was all over. After the memorial service, after the will was probated, I didn't feel like hanging around Atlanta. So I made arrangements, gave most of my liquid assets to a community for abused kids in New Hampshire, and bought a cabin on 200 acres in the woods of Vermont. It was here I'd brought my old friend to the place he'd talked about. Pondering the finality of it all, I held the urn containing his ashes, a few bone fragments and pieces of his teeth, ready to fulfill a promise I had never made. Such a time demands words. I took a deep breath of icy air and looked up toward the top of a towering birch. A squirrel made an untidy, tangled nest up there in the highest branches, and the animal itself, or maybe another squirrel, who could tell, hung below the nest, head down in the trunk, apparently gazing at me. I imagined the squirrel's bright black eye held accusation. The fall had gone on so long, probably for half the animal's lifetime. So what was the idea of all this snow? Was I to blame? Clearing my throat, I reached far back into memory, groping for the prayers I had last recited as a child. I heard myself say, "Dear God." My words took flight toward the washed-out sky on puffs of vapor. As far as I could tell, no one heard them but me and the squirrel. My voice had a harsh tone even to my own ears, a rusty hinge catch. The book is Death in the Pines. It's an Oakley Tyler novel based in Vermont.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Yo, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And so happy to be here. You know, I actually, the first 2 days that we were in Roatan, I was like, I just want to lay in this hammock, right? And by the third day, I was just going crazy, and I wrote an op-ed for Alternet, which has not yet been published. I don't know if they're going to or not, but I sent it in to them. And on the fourth day, I'm sitting with Louise saying, maybe we should outline a novel or a book or something. And I was like, damn, I didn't bring my computer with me because I thought I was going to take a vacation. I got a book that Troy and I are working on here. It's a rewrite of Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. And I was, I should have brought this. But I don't know. Do you do vacations? Do you do vacations well? I don't do vacations well. Louise and I, when we first got married, we decided that, and it was a decision that was based basically on reading John D. MacDonald's Travis McGee novels. Get your philosophy of life from a good novelist, right? And it was that we didn't want to retire when we were old and feeble. And so we wanted to take our retirement throughout our lives. And so we built up 5 different businesses, built them up, made enough money that we could live for a year or two without a job, sold them off, wiped out our savings over the next year or two, always tried to end up with, $10, $20, $50,000, something like that in the bank when we were all done, and just enough to start another business, along with maybe a line of credit or something. And so I've retired a bunch of times, but every time I did it, I ended up like, doing international relief work, traveling around the world, feeding starving people, writing novels, writing books. Maybe I'm a workaholic, or maybe it's just like this is something we all have. I don't know. But anyhow, if you have any specific insights into how to do a vacation well, I would welcome them. Dave in Radcliffe, Kentucky. Hey, Dave, thanks for calling. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hey, Tom, I got a couple of questions about some things I heard on the news over the weekend. I just want to get your take on it, and it might be pretty quick. First was this idea. I don't know who mentioned it, maybe Congressman Markey, but I was really amazed. He mentioned he mentioned to the reporter that he believes that these retired generals that are always, like General Marks, the
TV pundit generals.
These generals that they bring on the media as expert opinions on things.
Right.
The ones that are embedded with the media, as they say sometimes.
Yeah.
They should disclose. He said that they should disclose what board, defense contractor boards they sit on.
Yes, I agree. Many of them are multimillionaires as a consequence of their work on these big defense boards, and they have clear conflicts of interest. Some of this was pointed out after when the media was doing navel gazing around 2006, 2007, after the media pushed us to war in 2003, and then we're starting to realize how stupid that was, and they went back and started. I think one of the first generals who got outed on that account was Barry McCaffrey, as I recall. But I'm guessing probably all of them, if they're on the media, have. And in some cases have not just a deal with some defense contractor. In many cases, they have multiple deals with multiple defense contractors. It's a revolving door, Yep.
And then the second thing I heard, I want to get your take on, is, these fatal famine projections in Somalia, Nigeria, Yemen, and South Sudan. I mean, it's really troubling. And I want to get your opinion on that based on the light of, Trump's cuts on foreign aid.
Yeah. Well, it goes way beyond just Trump's cuts to foreign aid. Trump's cuts to foreign aid are terrible. I mean, because it's like such a small fragment of our budget that the average taxpayer is probably spending something like 80 cents a year for foreign aid. I mean, it's inconsequential. But these famines are real. I mean, there are, as we speak, 500,000 children who are looking like stick figures and dying literally every day in Somalia. There's another 500,000 people who are on the edge of famine in South Sudan. Ellen Ratner goes to South Sudan
3 or 4 times a year. Louise and I had dinner with her here in D.C. a couple of weeks ago after she had just gotten back from South Sudan, and she was like, it's unbelievable. And the UN does not have the resources they need. And there's a war going on, which prevents a lot of things going on. A large chunk of this is the consequence of war, but that's the glib answer. What's really going on is climate change. And this is what provoked the so-called Arab Spring, is that the deserts in northern Africa are moving south. And you've got a million Syrian farmers 7 years ago were forced off their land because their farms literally were turned into sand, into deserts. And so, they end up in Aleppo or in Damascus and as homeless people and beggars. And these are people who had, dignity and life and tribe and community for millennia. And suddenly they're street people. And that's the formula for revolution, which is exactly what happened. It happened in Egypt. It happened in Sudan. It happened not Sudan. It happened in Libya. It happened in Syria. It happened in Tunisia. And so when you combine and this is what's happening in South Sudan, is you've got Salva Kiir, the president of South Sudan, who I met. I spent 2 hours with this guy when I was over there with Ellen Ratner back 6 years ago. We did our show for a week from 16 miles away from Darfur in Gok Machar up in the northwest corner of South Sudan. In a refugee camp that was a town of 7,000 people that had 45,000 refugees in it, and one hand-cranked water well, 500 miles from the nearest electricity and 500 miles from the nearest paved road. We had to fly in an old twin propeller engine cargo plane carrying about a half a ton of food, and that area, which at least had a few streams and some water. I mean, seasonally they would have drought every year. They'd have the dry season and the wet season. Now they're not even getting the wet season. They're just, it's just famine, and people are just dying left and right, and that has provoked, in large part, that, and also they've discovered oil there, and the Chinese are in there buying oil like there's no tomorrow all over Africa. Not just oil, but all kinds of resources. So you've got the resource wars going on, and then you've got this climate change driven conflict. So Salva Kiir, the president of South Sudan, is now in a civil war with his vice president, who I think I also met. I didn't talk to him, but I'm pretty sure he was in the room with us. And this is what's going on around the world. And number one, just throwing money and feeding people is not going to solve the problem, although over the short term, it's something we absolutely have a moral obligation to do. Number two, if Donald Trump gave any kind of rat's ass at all about the children of Syria, he would not be keeping them locked in Syria. He would allow some of them to come to the United States as refugees. And number three, he's got to acknowledge, we have to acknowledge, the United States has to acknowledge that many of these conflicts are being driven not just by Saudi Arabia, our ally exporting Wahhabism, but that's the weapon that they use. But the thing that makes it all possible is climate change, which is creating starvation. It's creating famine. And as resources become thinner and thinner, conflict amps up, and then people form tribal groups, and those tribal groups become more entrenched, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Am I making sense here, Dave?
Yeah, Tom, I appreciate your take the most. That's why I decided to call with those questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And unfortunately, my take doesn't boil down to a bumper sticker, and that's what Trump understands. I mean, he's got a bumper sticker now. Gas kids, we kick your ass, right? And it just kind of looks that way, right? But even though he didn't. But that, and it's really a tragedy. Dave, thanks for the call. Alexandra in Laconner, Washington. Hey, Alexandra, what's on your mind?
Tom, thank you for taking my call, and most of all, thank you for you. I'm calling because I am sick and tired of listening to Mitch McConnell use the phrase, the American people.
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell does not speak for me. At best, he speaks for the people of Kentucky.
No, well, he speaks for the billionaires who own and control the Republican Party. I mean,
That's what
full
I was
stop.
going to say next. He speaks for Wall Street and he speaks for the banksters. He does not speak for the American people. But he gets up there and foghorns it out about, oh, the American people think this and the American people want that. And anyway, this morning I called his offices and I told them, he doesn't speak for me. Stop it. And I would love, love, love it if a lot of people would call his offices and say the same thing.
Okay, Mitch McConnell, if you want to call his office, the number for the congressional switchboard is 202-225-3121. 202-225-3121. That gets you to the switchboard. You can ask for any member of Congress, including Mitch McConnell. And Alexander, I absolutely share your view, and I would apply it more generally to virtually every Republican member of Congress. They are all singing the tune of the billionaire class and nobody else.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of your calls. And welcome back. Let's see here. Coco watching Free Speech TV in Brandon, Florida. Hey, Coco, what's up?
Good afternoon, Professor. Buddy, how you doing there?
I'm well. How are you, Coco?
Hanging in there. Glad you got away and had a wonderful time.
Thank you. Me too.
If I may add a little FYI, I've been living aboard a sailboat down here for 30 years, so I totally understand.
Oh, sweet.
And getting away.
Yeah.
I see an image from of a child killed by what we saw with chemicals, or blood and guts from a bomb, or a killing, or famine, like you were just talking about. Seems to me like isn't dead?
Isn't what?
Dead.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, isn't it to me? That shouldn't matter how.
Oh, Donald Trump killed more kids with drone strikes last month than Assad did with gas. That's not to justify what Assad is doing at all in any way. But right. The reality is that if he gave, like I said, he doesn't give a rat's ass about the kids of Syria. Donald Trump is being driven by Fox News. Fox News will not show pictures of the victims of Donald Trump. So instead, they show the pictures of the victims of Assad, and Donald Trump has to react to Fox News. That's what's going on. There's this cycle between Fox News and the Trump White House, and Fox News, of course, is a relatively fact-free cult, and they are driving our foreign policy, and that should scare the hell out of all of us.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah,
we're in. Should I say, we're in deep.
Yeah, we're in deep doo-doo. Yes, I agree. Coco, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you.
Thank you.
Let's see here. Eric in San Juan Capistrano. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind today?
How's it going?
Good. What's up?
My question is that do you really believe that Assad's behind the gas attack, or do you think it's a false flag? Because when you look at the videos, they show the white helmets treating these people apparently have sarin gas all over them without gloves. It's not like they've done this before, tricked us with a fake attack, back in 2013. So I think maybe it seems like Assad would have to be a real big idiot to do this when he was gaining ground. He has all the advantage. He pretty much had Trump almost on his side, not really, but So I think it seems that the powers that be want us in a war no matter what, and Trump's such a reactive, simple-minded thinker that maybe this is what's really happening. We're just being sucked into a war. I mean, we just spent 57 Tomahawk missiles over there, which cost how many millions?
$1 million a piece.
I think there's a profit motive behind all this, and we're just being lied into another war again.
Yeah. Well, here a couple thoughts on this, Eric. First of all, I don't think that this was a U.S. false flag operation, because we're not going to be able to fly aircraft into space that's being monitored by Russia, at least without them knowing all about it. And if they knew all about it, they would have said something to the world, not just to us. So, but whether Assad did this, whether ISIS did this, whether it was one of the other groups, whether it was actually sarin or not, I am not enough of an expert to tell you. I do know that The Guardian actually got a reporter into the region and afterwards and said, it really looked like it was what it was and that it wasn't a factory that got blown up. But I don't know, and I'm not sure anybody can definitely assert it. Eric, thanks for the call. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Kenneth in South Bend, Indiana. Hey, Kenneth, what's on your mind today?
Well, I like to thank you for the person that you are. I feel more at ease when I listen to your program, especially now that you hit on the totalitarian government, and that really puzzled me because people have voted right down the line and put a guy like Marco back in there who missed 33% of his work for the year, and they put him back in, and everyone, you can go down the line, and it's that. Well,
Marco Rubio, like many of these Republicans, is a testimonial to the power of billionaire money. He's got a billionaire who is a patron of his, who funds his elections and keeps him in place. Without the billionaire class, the Republicans would have no power right now. It's really that simple.
Yeah, and to see when we are sitting here watching the President of the United States go out there and defend Putin and the things that he has done in the past and all that, totalitarian government isn't going to work in a democracy, period.
Well, the big danger is democracies turning into totalitarian governments.
Yes.
And the way typically that happens is through basically neoliberal policies like the policies that are promoted by the Chicago School of Economics. This is, they tried their very best in Chile with Pinochet. They went down there and said, okay, privatize Social Security, privatize everything, sell off everything the government owns. And it destroyed the country. Pinochet killed 3,000 people just to try to put down the rebellion from people who didn't want their Social Security taken away from them. The shock doctrine that they did in Russia when the Soviet Union dissolved during the Yeltsin administration set up the oligarchs who are there now. But it's not just Russia or China or Chile. It's happening right now in the United States and has been since Ronald Reagan's administration. It's happening all over the world. But here in our country, I mean, we've got a political system, that is run by the billionaires. The proof of it, the ultimate proof of Gorsuch being put on the court today. This is a guy who, never met a billionaire he didn't love. His mom tried to destroy the EPA. He's going to destroy everything else. And it's just, totalitarianism, not a good thing. Well said, Kenneth. Thanks for the call. Eric in Atlanta. Hey, Eric, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? I'd just like to say thanks for taking my call and thanks for programs like Free Speech TV.
Yeah, amen.
But I really just have a comment more so than a question, and that is that, I just find it to be almost unbelievable that we, the American people, put these politicians and so-called leaders into the positions that we put them in and then act as if we expect them to be somebody other than who they are. The fact of the matter is that our so-called leaders have no sense of humanity. And that's the terrible part of all of it. Not only do these people not care about Americans, they don't care about humans, period.
Well, the one qualifier I would make, Eric, is that we the people didn't do this. The Republicans in the United States Senate represent a little more than 30% of the American population. 3 million more people voted for Hillary Clinton than for Donald Trump. And in the House of Representatives, in every election, I'm not sure about the last one, I haven't seen the numbers in the last one, but in every one of the last half a dozen elections where the Republicans held the House of Representatives, they did not get the majority of votes across the United States. It was the result of Republican gerrymandering. And this Republican gerrymandering and these policies of grabbing these small states and flipping them red, these were very deliberate policies that were put into place after 1971, after the Powell Memo, throughout the 70s and the 80s, by a group of very, very well-heeled people. The Koch brothers, Joe Coors, the Bradley, the Scape Foundation, the Bradley Foundation. These billionaires and the billionaire families and foundations, the Walton families and whatnot, and they basically organized this billionaire/corporate takeover of the American government, to the point that President Jimmy Carter comes on my program last year, you might have heard it, live on the air, and says, this isn't a democracy anymore. We are now, and I quote President Carter, we are now an oligarchy. I don't know if you got the clip. We are now an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery. When a guy who has sat in the White House for 4 years, who understands how our government works probably better than anybody on earth, has this to say. Just listen to this, Eric.
Our Supreme Court has now said, unlimited money in politics.
It's the setup, but he's going to answer.
A violation of principles of democracy. In the minute or so we have left, your thoughts on that?
It violates the essence of what made America a great country in its political system. Now it's just an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery being the essence of getting the nominations for president or the elected president. And the same thing applies to governors and U.S. senators and Congress members. So now we've just seen a complete subversion of our political system as a payoff to major contributors who want and expect and sometimes get favors for themselves after the election's over.
Yeah, to say the very least. So there you are, Eric. Eric, thanks a lot for the call. Scott in Canaan, Maine. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I'm going to follow up on Jimmy's comment. Fantastic example. Somebody needs to say it, but I know you don't like to hear people disagree with you because you push the button and cut them off. But
I actually like it when people disagree with me, Scott. I usually cut people off when they call me names.
I don't call you names, Tom. I've been watching you forever.
Feel free to disagree with me.
No, I do agree with most of what you say. But the other side of the coin is the Democrats are trying to reinvent themselves now again as the party of the people, and they are just as toxic as any Republican up there. They're all millionaires for the most part.
Well, that's not true of all of them, Scott. The largest, or maybe the second largest caucus in Congress is the Progressive Caucus, and most of the members of the Progressive Caucus are not multimillionaires, and they're not taking money from big corporations and from billionaires, and they do represent
That's probably where we disagree. And I give you a good example, but she's a Republican. Senator Snowe went in there where it says she'd only do 2 terms, and she went in there her first term worth, I don't know, 30, 40,000, came out 6 years later worth $1.3 million, and that's all, the insider trading and all the rest of it that was going on, probably still is.
Yeah, but Olympia Snowe's a Republican. I mean, look at the Democrats.
The Democrats are just as guilty.
No, they're not.
As the Republicans.
You will find that some of your Democrats are. I don't disagree. There are some very wealthy Democrats in there, and some of them who are gaming the system. But the Democratic Party still has a soul, and it still has a lot of people who are very concerned about these things. And it's there. I'm not giving up on it. I want to work to save it. Scott, I understand your concern, but I'm not, I don't share your cynicism. Thanks a lot for the call, though. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. And welcome to Thom Hartmann University, our book club. And today we're reading from Ralph Nader's Breaking Through Power. It's easier than we think. This is from page 74, the chapter How the System is Rigged. According to Russell Mokaber, editor of the Corporate Crime Reporter, quote, corporate crime takes far more lives, causes far more injuries and diseases, and steals far more money than street crime. But the vast amount of law enforcement resources, mass media attention, and prison cell blocks are devoted only to street crime. Just consider these preventable casualties. Almost 60,000 annual workplace-related fatalities from both disease and trauma. 54,000 deaths a year from air pollution. Over 100,000 lives lost as a result of medical malpractice. Nearly 100,000 lives lost from hospital-induced infections. Over 100,000 fatalities from adverse effects of drugs, and over 40,000 deaths every year due to inadequate or no health care coverage for diagnosis, treatment, and medication. There are far larger numbers of sicknesses and injuries attached to these data sets. These statistics have haunting human faces. Children, women, men, and families destroyed by uncontrollable, monetized minds. Whether they are caused by recklessness, criminal negligence, or worse, the key factors in common are the preventability of such pain and the suffering inflicted from commercially induced neglect, predation, manslaughter, and homicide. By comparison, street and home homicides do not exceed 14,000 lives lost annually. Now see how companies have made sure they have the laws that they need to go after you, and how they make sure that the law can be used as their punisher. The giant multi-tiered home mortgage business, now driven by the same 1%ers who profited from crashing the economy in 2008, can nail you if you misrepresent information on your mortgage application. Suppose you say you're going to occupy your house as a principal residence to get a lower interest rate and down payment, and you don't for some reason. Lenders can call the loan and demand repayment if the mortgage balance is outstanding. Absent that payment, the lender can seize your home, foreclosure. In addition, by claiming you committed bank fraud, these companies can use the FBI against you. As the veteran housing columnist Kenneth R. Harvey warned, this can trigger severe financial penalties, prosecution, and prison time for ordinary Americans. But how many bankers feel the cold metal of handcuffs tighten on their wrists when their crimes rob American families of their homes and life savings? Health insurance companies have similar supporting laws to deny medical coverage by alleging illegal activities. This could mean anything from non-disclosure of traffic violations to gun accidents, even when there has been no conviction. It could mean something as vague as hazardous behavior, according to the New York Times. If a company paid you and comes back for their money, they can get you prosecuted for fraud. These corporate Goliaths are too big to fail. If they know how to enact laws to make sure that you are, and they know how to enact laws to make sure that you are too small to stop them. Corporate state culture, the plutocracy whom oligarchy is given an astonishing exoneration, so long as it claims that violence and mayhem are not their direct purpose, but an unfortunate byproduct that just couldn't be helped. Like when innocent people are accidentally killed by U.S. drone attacks, the government seems to quietly get a free pass. It's almost as if corporations get away with a permanent defense of an institutional insanity, a defense going global in terms of deadly supply chains, from horrific African mines to dangerous factories in China, India, and Bangladesh. Deoxygenation and poisoning of the vast oceans, estuaries, rivers, and lakes. upping greenhouse gases into rapid climate destabilization, extending the range of infectious diseases due to habitat and ecological disruption and desecration, and changing the nature of nature itself through unregulated genetic engineering and nanotechnology. Even with 6 million slow, agonizing deaths a year globally attributed to the tobacco business, cigarettes are still demonically promoted by one-percenters who reap staggering profits from selling their addictive and poisonous product, especially in developing nations where regulations protecting children do not exist. The excuse is forever that corporatists have no intention, knowledge, or reason to do harmful things. The institutional insanity defense again. Or the manufacturers of weapons of mass destruction, whose militant advertisements say they are just helping the national defense, but are not at all responsible for their products' use in the coercive policies of empire and perpetual war. Is it institutional madness or infantilism? Did the World War II allies let the giant Krupp works in Germany get away with this excuse after the war ended? It's time for people to take away these rationalizations of omnicide from corporations that demand they be legally privileged as persons for their pursuit of profits, but not as persons for our pursuit of them as criminal predators and refugees from justice. In the 2012 U.S. presidential campaign, Republican nominee Mitt Romney, asked about corporate personhood, replied that it was a given, saying, "Hey, corporations are people, my friend," like it was a science fact he learned in 5th grade. This is no mere throwaway line. Billions of dollars of litigating, advertising, marketing, and corporatist commentary have been focused on driving this people image into our minds from childhood. Regularly, full-page ads show that Goliath corporations like Walmart or Lockheed Martin are just people like you. The ads are filled with pictures and names of the faithful workers who bring you goods and services. The book by Ralph Nader, Breaking Through Power.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I mentioned in the first hour I wanted to talk about capitalism. And I want to get into this because this is, I think, there is obviously a worldwide war threat. We've got Kim Jong-un in North Korea with nuclear weapons and Donald Trump doing serious saber rattling and sending part of the Pacific Fleet in that direction. You've got the situation in Syria, which could put us literally into a war with Russia, which would not be good for either country, to say the very least, not to mention the poor Syrians who are caught in the crossfire. And not even the crossfire between us, because also in Syria, you've got warring Sunni groups. You got the old Al Qaeda dead enders. You've got the ISIL people. You got et cetera. It's just plus the Shia who are supported by Iran, and then who are we supporting? I don't know. We did something against Assad, but that sort of helps ISIL. But in any case, so you've got, we've got some really serious world war problems that we're looking at, and the possibility of conflict with China, and, a variety of these. But here at home and around the world, there's another crisis unfolding, and and it's been unfolding since the 80s. This really began with Thatcherism and Reaganism. In a big way. I mean, the fertile ground was laid in the 70s and 80s by a group of billionaire funders who took what were considered crackpot economic theories. Milton Friedman, von Mises, Hayek, Friedrich Hayek, Ludwig von Mises. These guys, today we would refer to them as neoliberal or libertarian economists. And, they were always considered just like way out of the mainstream, fringe, crazy people. But their economic policies always worked to the benefit of the top 5%, arguably the top 10%. And
And certainly the top 1%, the vast majority of the top 1% or less. And so they had a real staying power. Newspapers bought by very wealthy people and big corporations would promote their interests and their points of view and on and on and on like this. And, you know, and as a consequence of that, what we've been seeing around the world is the destruction of the social state. And we're seeing this in the European Union with, well, we saw it in a big way in Greece. We've seen it in Ireland. We've seen it in Spain. We've seen it in Italy, Portugal. We're seeing it, thank you, Troy. We're seeing it here in the United States. We've been seeing it in the United Kingdom since 1978. We've been seeing it in the U.S. since 1981. It's going back and forth in you know, several South American countries. So, and really what it is it's all about the money. And of course, money is power, so it's money and power. The idea that we learned in elementary school, that there should be a clear separation between what is publicly owned, what is the commons, what we all do for ourselves in order to make our lives better, in order to make our government work better, in order to make our companies work better, in order to foster competition and diminish the power of monopoly in the marketplace. All of these things are being stripped, and they're being replaced with this raw, naked, libertarian, neoliberal form of capitalism that, like I said, only serves the top, you know, in a big way the top 1%, in a modest way the top 10%, and basically dumps on everybody in the bottom 90%. And I give you two examples, one from the United Kingdom, one from the United States. The one from the United Kingdom is by Owen Jones in the New York Times last week. The headline is "Why Britain's Trains Don't Run on Time, Capitalism." And you can take this back to John Major, the conservative who in the 1990s sold off the British-owned railroads. You know, Britain used to own their own railroads. Maggie Thatcher wanted to do this. She was not successful in pulling off the whole thing. But it was called the Great Sell-Off of the 1990s. And what Prime Minister Major said was, rail privatization will bring a better, cheaper, and more effective service for the commuter. Right. You know, it's going to be a better thing for the people who use the trains in the United Kingdom. I quote from the article by Owen Jones in the New York Times. If how the railways run is a guide to the state of a nation, and it tells you something that Britain is in the middle of its biggest railway strike since 1994. Not coincidentally, that was the year the National Railroad Network was privatized by the conservative government of Prime Minister John Major. The long-running battle between rail unions and the companies is estimated to have cost Britain's economy over about $375 million and has even hit house prices in the region. Now, why would it hit house prices? Well, if you've ever lived in a city that has a mass transit system, you know that as soon as it is publicly known that a railway station, a train station, a metro station is going to be sited in a particular neighborhood, all the home values in that neighborhood explode. Because people can more easily and cheaply commute to work and to shop and to theaters and to everything. I got to work today on the train. I walked 8 or 9 blocks down to the L'Enfant Metro Center. I walked down underground, got on the train. 5 stops later, come up, and I'm 2 blocks from the radio studio here. The whole trip took 5 minutes. Once I was on the train, maybe 8 minutes. It's wonderful. I mean, the train system in this town is just marvelous. And, you know, it's been the victim of years and years of disrepair because the Republicans control Congress and they don't like any kind of, you know, let's not spend anything that might help Washington, D.C. It's a liberal city and it's filled with black people. You know, the Republican Party does not, they've always hated Washington, D.C. But, you know, finally the metro system got a guy who is like, okay, damn it, we're going to fix this thing. But in the UK, the trains are not running on time. And as Owen Jones writes, this points out the perils of introducing market ideology into key public services, a project driven not by the needs of passengers, but by uncompromising dogma. Dogma, what I was talking about, ideology. This ideology that, you know, competition drives down. In fact, I saw a tweet from Paul Ryan on this a couple of days ago. Competition drives down prices. We've got to have more competition in medical services to get the prices down. Right. Right now, doctors are competing. You can call 5 different doctors. You can compare prices. Oh, he means health insurance. So, yeah, right. Well, competition among health insurance companies, not so much. It's like you know, anything that's complex. It's like when you have to read a 20-page policy and you've got to compare that to 20 other 20-page, that's not competition. That's just craziness. But anyway, back to British Rail. On the eve of the great sell-off of the 1990s, Mr. Major pledged that rail privatization would bring a better, cheaper, and more effective service for the commuter, in quotes. To repeat that promise to beleaguered passengers today would at best provoke mirthless laughter. On Southern, this is one of the privatized railroads, passenger satisfaction slumped to 21% this year. Nearly half of those surveyed reported delays in their last journey. The company has become a byword for overcrowding, delays, and understaffing. The privatizers claimed that competition would lift standards of service, put the needs of customers first, reduce the burden on the taxpayer, rid the system of inefficiencies, and drive down prices. On all scores, the privatization of Britain's railways is an embarrassment. So that's Britain. Now here in the U.S., Sarah Lazar, writing over at Alternet, based back on April 4th also. Great juxtaposition of these two stories. Cities, you know, we were all over this back 5-6 years ago when Chicago privatized their parking meters, which was stupid. Mike Pence privatizing roads in Indiana. Stupid. I mean, public infrastructure is public for a reason. Right? It should be public for a reason. But now they're privatizing their red light and their camera systems that catch people running red lights. Now, this is the best example of why some things should be public and some things should be private. What is the reason why we have traffic lights? Do we have traffic lights so that our cities can make money? Or do we have traffic lights so people don't die in traffic accidents and so the traffic moves smoothly? I would argue it's the latter reason. Right? You have traffic light and you time the length of your yellow lights so that people can clear the intersection and get ready for the green light and the red light and all that kind of, I mean, there's a science to this, actually. There are people who go to college to study this stuff. Because the whole purpose of traffic lights is for the public good. It's to keep traffic moving well and reduce the probability of people dying in car crashes. So here, Sarah Lazar, this could happen to you. Revenue-hungry cities mess with traffic lights to write more tickets and make driving more dangerous. But it's not the cities doing it. It's the private companies they've contracted it out to. Because now some cities are saying, hey, let's run our traffic lights for profit. As privately owned, Sarah writes, as privately owned red light cameras proliferate across the country, cities and towns shortening yellow lights spike the number of tickets and thereby increase revenue. The profits come at a social cost, however, as shorter yellow light times are associated with an increase in car accidents. So a few people die, more little kids in the back seat who get T-boned by the car coming through the light, trying to run die. But hey, you've got private red light camera companies making more money. Isn't capitalism wonderful? We've got to wake the hell up about the difference between public and private in this country. I know that the Republicans stripped it out of our public curriculum in our schools in the 1980s. We need to bring it back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There is a difference between doing something for profit and doing something for the public good. And almost without exception, you can't do both. And welcome back. Scott, Missoula, Montana, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hey, Tom. I think we've been given a good teachable moment in this issue where the United passenger got knocked out and drug off the flight. I don't know if you've seen anything about that.
I've seen the clips that are floating around Twitter. I've watched 2 of them. It looks pretty grim. It was a cop wearing blue jeans, right, who reached across the seat and dragged the guy out?
Yeah, but it's a perfect example of how this country's turning into a fascist society, because if you tie that into the Gorsuch appointment and his opinion on the truck driver that got fired, what do you think would happen in this case when this goes to court and it ends up in the Supreme Court? The guy that got knocked out is going to lose for the same type of.
Of course, it's in his terms of carriage. When you fly on a United States airline, the contract that you probably have not read, that you agree to every time you buy a ticket, when you click that little yes, I agree to the terms of service, and conditions, that contract says we are not guaranteeing you a seat, and you may be kicked off the airplane. And it's very straightforward. And, people don't realize that. And this doctor, he was like, hey, wait a minute, I got patients tomorrow. I've got to do, surgery or whatever I do. And so I'm not giving up my seat. And they were like, oh, yes, you are, buddy.
Right. And so now, the consequences of the election of somebody like Trump, who's a fascist, is that we get a fascist Supreme Court justice. And then, there go our rights and our protections. I mean, you should not be knocked unconscious because you won't get off an airplane. There's other ways to handle
that. And there's another piece to this, Scott, that nobody is even discussing. Well, maybe somebody is. I've only, like I said, I've seen the things on Twitter, and I skimmed a couple of headlines this morning. I haven't read any in-depth stories on it, but I would bet that nobody is pointing out that typically, and I don't know if this is the case with this particular example on United, but I'd be astonished if it's not, that typically when you're flying, my family members, we all just went down to Roatan, right? And my advice to my kids when they were buying their tickets was, if you don't have a frequent flyer number with this airline, get one. Because when they bump people who are not the frequent flyers, because they know that those people are probably not going to be back. They're the least likely to fly again on that airline. And what they're bumping them for, in many cases, are people who are frequent flyers, who do have a frequent flyer number with that airline. So what this airline is doing by dragging somebody off the plane who already has an assigned seat, presumably, and again, let me put this in a larger context than just United, because I don't know all the details on this, and it would be, unfair to United at the very least, and inappropriate of me to say that, to state this as if I know it as a fact when I don't. So with all those caveats, but generally speaking, what you see here is basically a profit-making corporation giving preferential treatment to their better customers at the expense of their less frequent customers. And, that's capitalism. I get that. But that did not happen when the airlines were regulated. From 1983 to 1986, Louise and I owned a travel agency in Atlanta. And the airlines, starting in 83, 84, Reagan deregulated the airlines. The airlines' terms of carriage, they didn't used to be able to do this stuff. It was against the law. But now, hey, capitalism reigns. Scott, I got to run. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them.
in standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day. You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And okay, capitalism. I've done my rant here, but this is increased. This is remarkable. You know how they're doing this. In February, the city of Fremont, California, they're refunding almost $500,000 in tickets because they shortened the yellow light at two key intersections from 4.7 to 4 seconds. These intersections were outfitted with red light cameras run by Red Flex Traffic Systems, for-profit corporation. According to the newspaper.com, the slight variation in yellow light time had a tremendous impact, increasing the yellow time by 0.7 of a second in 2015, slashed the number of tickets issued. This is when they undid what they did. Slashed the number of tickets by 77%. And shortening it back to 4 seconds in February 2016 caused a 445% spike in ticketing. So this is going from 4.7 seconds, which was the optimal time, down to a 4-second yellow light, caused a 445% increase in tickets. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Fremont is not the only city caught manipulating yellow lights for profit. Chicago Tribune investigation revealed in 2014 that the Rahm Emanuel administration quietly issued newer, shorter yellow light standards this spring that generated 77,000 red light camera tickets that would not have been allowed before the rule change. The change occurred when the city switched from red light camera company Red Flex Traffic System to Xerox State and Local Solutions. Amazing. Following the public outrage, Rahm Emanuel was recently forced to triple the yellow light grace period. But according to James Walker, the executive director of the National Motorists Association Foundation, the problem persists across the country. He says there's something in the order of 400 communities that are using these private, for-profit red light cameras. And there is no evidence that these improve public safety. In fact, they increase the probability of, Emanuel has credited the cameras for a 47% reduction in dangerous red angular T-bone crashes. But the Tribune study, which accounted for declining accident rates in recent years, found cameras reduced right-angle crashes by just 15%. At the same time, the study calculated a corresponding 22% increase in rear-end crashes that caused injuries, illustrating a trade-off between the camera's costs and benefits. This could happen to you. It's amazing. It's all over the country, too. Capitalism wins, we lose. Anyhow, we'll be back. Your calls on whatever you'd like to talk about today. Stick around. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls right after.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Our book today is Walking Your Blues Away, How to Heal the Mind and Create Emotional Well-Being. And we're reading starting on page 2 in the introduction. The human body is a self-healing organism. When you cut your finger, it heals. If you break your leg, it heals. Even if part of you is cut out in surgery, the surgeon's wound heals. We heal from bacterial and viral invasions, from injuries, from all variety of traumas. The mechanisms of healing are built into us. 5 million years of evolution or the grace of God or both have made our bodies automatic healing machines. So why wouldn't the same be true of our minds and our emotions? All of the traumas that we experience in life leave their wounds. If humankind hadn't had ways of healing from those emotional and psychological blows, over time society would have become progressively less functional. Instead, history shows us that people usually recover from even the most severe psychological wounds, often learning great lessons or gaining important insights in the recovery process. The famous Kauai, Hawaii longitudinal study of children raised in stressful, disadvantaged conditions, they were migrant farm workers, found that a higher percentage of the children grew up to be highly resilient than did a middle-class control group. The generation that survived the Great Depression and the Nazi Holocaust in Europe went on to create important social institutions, build nations, and offer comfort and hope to humankind. Elie Wiesel's experience specifically comes to mind, although he never would have wished on another the horrific experience of being in one of Hitler's death camps. Through his writing of that experience, he has given a particularly inspiring model of resilience and healing to the world. The reality is that although adversity breaks some people, it strengthens others. And when people heal from adversity, the old cliche of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger usually rings true. But just as with the production of scar tissue in the healing of a wound to the skin, a process involving millions of cells producing very specific compounds in response to the trauma in the tissue, there must be an inborn mechanism for healing the mind and the emotions. And just as healing from a cut can be speeded up by keeping the wound dry, or can be slowed down by letting the wound get wet or dirty and irritated, this emotional healing is also a process that can be either stimulated or thwarted by our interventions. In this book, I've identified a specific healing mechanism and process that nature has built into the human mind and body that enables us to process trauma in a way that is quick, functional, and permanent. Just like the skin's mechanism for forming scabs and scars and eventually even making the scars vanish, this mechanism is simple, fundamental, and elegant. In its simplest form, this mechanism involves rhythmic side-to-side stimulation of the body. The side-to-side motion, or bilateral motion, causes nerve impulses to cross the brain from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere and back at a specific rate or frequency. This cross-patterning produces an organic integration of left hemispheric thinking functions with right hemisphere and brainstem feeling functions. This integration is a necessary precursor to emotional and intellectual healing from trauma. This steady movement of nerve impulses across the hemispheres of the brain is stimulated by the bilateral movement processes of a variety of modern forms of psychotherapy, such as eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, also known as EMDR, emotional freedom technique, and thought field therapy. In its purest form, however, I've discovered that the natural and rhythmic left-right process of walking while performing a simple mental exercise can also stimulate the same internal integration process. This, I posit, is the way humans have healed themselves for trauma for the hundreds of thousands of years of human history. And it's only because so few of us walk anymore that we have to resort to office-based psychotherapeutic processes to produce a similar result. And that result is impressive. When we stimulate the nervous system in this bilateral manner while calling to mind a persistent emotional distress, the emotional charge associated with that memory quickly and permanently dissipates. This isn't a process of producing amnesia or forgetting. Instead, it's a way of reframing the past, a way of re-understanding or putting into context what has been so unnerving to us. When we perform this bilateral process correctly, the pictures of painful past events in our memory transforms from stark, scary, sound-filled color movies into black and white still pictures that are flattened out and lose their sound. The internal dialogue we have about the events, the tagline that we tell ourselves, and actually hear in our own heads and in our own voices, changes, usually from something like, that was a painful experience that still scares me, or I was victimized in that relationship, to a more productive synopsis, such as, yes, that happened to me, but it's well in the past now, and I've learned some good lessons from the experience. I can now let go of it. Inciting the movement of nerve impulses across the brain's hemispheres helps people come to terms with their past. They stop being frightened by their imagined futures and feel comfortable and empowered in the present. Walking while holding a traumatic memory in mind in a particular way can produce this result in a very short time. And the book goes on to talk about how exactly to use simple walking, just going out for a 20-minute walk, which is physically good for you. Use that simple walking and combine it with a very specific set of mental exercises that Sigmund Freud and Franz Anton Mesmer and others first discovered years ago. Walking your blues away.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We cover and the issues we care about are at hartmanreport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation.
So back to, just to finish my rant about capitalism. We have, and we have had, for at least a decade, we've had the ability for several decades. We've had the economic ability, that is to say, same or less cost to provide electricity to people from the sun or from the wind instead of from fossil fuels for at least a decade. It's right now, if you do away with all the subsidies that we provide to all industries, solar and wind are cheaper than any fossil fuel. And what we really should be doing, instead of building giant solar farms, these giant corporations, they want to centralize the power of electricity so that they can, again, control the model, right? But it creates these long grids that are vulnerable to everything from electromagnetic pulses to solar storms, to terrorist acts, to just failures and tornadoes and things. What we really should have is what Germany has, which is every house has, the roof is covered with solar cells, and they're all independent. I mean, they all feed into the grid for slow times and things like that. But if there's a disaster, every home can generate not every, but many homes can generate their own power. But instead, what do we have? We have the Keystone XL pipeline. Why do we have it? Because a Canadian corporation and the billionaires thereof, and the largest American owners of Canadian tar sands, the Koch brothers, and the Koch brothers refinery, now that's up in Canada, the Koch brothers refinery down on the Gulf Coast, according to Greg Palast on this program, they want to make money. To hell with the environment. And the kids who are smelling diesel fuel and the cancers and everything, screw all that stuff. So now we see this, can you imagine what a spill would look like in a solar panel, right? Gee, there's sun dribbling off the solar panel. Oh my God, we've got a sun spill. There's a wind spill at the windmill. Here's the article. This is by Alejandro Davila Fragoso in Washington, D.C. Nearly a week after pipeline operator TransCanada shut down a section of its Keystone line over an oil leak, the company reported Thursday thousands of gallons were spilled, not just the 200 they first said. Based on soil excavations, TransCanada said about 16,800 gallons of oil leaked into a field in South Dakota. Right. Keystone this. And this is not just regular oil, by the way. This is that Canadian tar sands oil, which, when they had that oil spill in the Kalamazoo River, 4 years ago, they're still trying to clean it up because this oil, typically oil floats or forms lumps of tar, and it's fairly easily cleaned out, either skimming it off the top or pulling it up from the bottom. But this tar sands oil is so dense that it just goes right down through the sand and down into the aquifers. And we're running this across the Ogallala Aquifer that's providing water to about a third of the United States. This is nuts. And we're doing it, why? So the Koch brothers can make more money? So the TransCanada can make more money? I mean, that's basically it. And we have no rational energy policy in the United States right now. Jimmy Carter was the last president to give us a rational energy policy. He put it into place in 1978. I've played the week before last, I played the clip for you, so I won't hit you with it again. He created a solar bank. He did it. And Ronald Reagan, first thing he did when he came into the White House in January 1981, was take down the solar collectors that Jimmy Carter had put up.
And here we are. In all this time, we have been sending hundreds of billions of dollars to Saudi Arabia, and they take that money and they turn it over to Wahhabists, over to the Wahhabist preachers, and they spread Wahhabism, this virulent form of radical Islam, literally all over the world. And this is the policy that the Republicans are promoting. And they call themselves Americans. I don't get it. Joe in Buffalo, New York. Hey, Joe, what's up?
Hey, how you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
Oh, very good, very good. First of all, I'd like to say I always enjoyed your music in your show.
Well, thank you. We had to go from using public domain music, which you can use on the radio, once our show was simulcast on television, into using music that we actually bought and paid for. Different rules for different mediums, which we're kind of mourning because we used to love to pick music and stuff. But anyhow, that's what it is. What it is.
Yeah. Okay. The reason you kind of caught my ear when it came to the business of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
I always kind of thought, and I think that everybody would kind of agree that a controlled capitalism is a better situation than an uncontrolled capitalism. I think that's common sense there.
Yeah, just ask Adam Smith. He wrote a book about it called Theory of Moral Sentiments in 1778.
Oh, well, there you go. So,
and a Theory of Moral Sentiments, by the way, the whole point of the book was that capitalism has no morality, and a republic, a government of we the people, does have a morality, and therefore it has an obligation to regulate capitalism. That's the essence of Adam Smith's book.
Yeah, I think I heard that before.
Yeah.
Tying into that and just driving around, I noticed that there is, to me, an uncontrolled situation when it comes to land management. And I see all these different areas being developed for these housing developments. And I kind of looked at the whole thing, and I think to myself, you got all these situations where you have prime land, and now you're having these developments happening where I think they shouldn't really be happening. And we're having a situation where I think we're bringing in more food from the outside. We don't have your farmers from the 1920s and the 30s anymore. And I think that it's a bad situation when it comes to this land management and the environment. You're having things being fractured and fragmented to the point where I think it's really damaging to a lot of different species of plants and animals, and
including Homo sapiens.
Yeah,
we are animals too. No, I absolutely agree with you, and you can look at cities that have planning, urban planning, versus cities that don't, and there not only is a dramatic quality of life difference, where you don't have urban sprawl and uncontrolled growth and all those kind of things, but rather you have green spaces and you have public spaces next to private spaces, but you actually have higher property values because the public spaces make the private spaces more valuable. And
there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, and it works to everyone's benefit. But it is not the libertarian way. It's not raw capitalism. It is state intervention, and there are people who reflexively object to that. And I don't get it. I mean, George Washington had 3 horses shot out from underneath him, fighting for a state, fighting for a nation. That would operate based on the general welfare, protecting for the purposes of providing for the general welfare of its people. Not of its billionaires, but of its people. It's right there. It's not only in the preamble to the Constitution, it's in the opening and the closing of Article 1, Section 8, the part the conservatives always love to say, those are the enumerated powers. Well, it says Congress can do things to promote the general welfare. And it defines a few of them, but it's completely open-ended. But yeah, and that's not just Congress. I mean, that's governments all over the country. Spot on, Joe. Very, very well said. Thanks a lot for the call. Ed in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Hey, Ed, what's up?
Tom, I'd like to say that I think Trump's probably like a political and military genius. I mean, imagine turning to your general and saying, why don't you fire 60 missiles at Syria? right in the middle of a state dinner with China. I mean, it kind of explains to them that they better do something about Korea or you're going to.
Yeah. Ed, I get it that, that's kind of the simple-minded response to it. And I'm not calling you simple-minded, but that's the way that Fox News is pitching it. That's probably the way that Trump was thinking of it. But the reality is that when you throw 60 missiles into a sovereign country that has mutual defense agreements with other sovereign countries that have big armies and large power, specifically Russia and Iran, and in the middle of a civil war, and you're trying to take down a government which is fighting against ISIL, you're being an idiot. And especially when you're doing it without the approval of Congress. I look at what's going on in Syria. I am horrified by it. I get it that if George W. Bush had not invaded Iraq and broken the Middle East, probably it wouldn't be anywhere near as bad as it is. But there is this large climate change component to it too. But if Trump is a military genius, Ed, he's a military genius, or he's a genius the way Goebbels was a genius. This was great propaganda for Trump's base. This was great propaganda for the simple-minded folks over at Fox News or who watch Fox News. And not to say that everybody who watches Fox News is simple-minded, but that very simple analysis. Oh, he's a tough guy. I guess everybody's going to be afraid of us now. No, people are not afraid of us. President Xi went back to China, and the first thing they said was Trump is a weakling. Ed, they said he's a weakling. Xinhua news agency, the official news agency speaking for the president of China, said that Trump's doing that while Xi was having dinner with Trump proved that Trump was a weakling. I think that your analysis, respectfully, Ed, is completely wrong. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Oil leak from Keystone Pipeline, 89 times worse than originally thought. You can read it over at thinkprogress.org. Oh, it'll never leak. Don't worry. And welcome back. William in Browns Summit, North Carolina. Hey, William, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how you doing this morning?
Good.
Or this afternoon, rather.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a couple things I wanted to speak about. I wanted to speak about the Syrian attack, and so and I'll keep it at that. What infuriates me about this whole situation is that everybody who thinks or who says that Trump showed great heart and great humanitarian response to this issue, I think was just looking for a way out to say that he had done something great, because he hadn't done anything great up to this point. And this wasn't great either. I think it was all, I'm not going to say that the attack was assimilated, but I think everything from that point on was his response to it, how he did it. I mean, when you're talking about launching, was it 59 missiles?
Something like that.
Yeah, and then then first you're going to let Russia know that you're going to do it, and then Russia's going to inform Syria so that they can get prepared. And you didn't even take out their runway. Right. To me, this was just an act of desperation, because I think, and what gets me is that it has caused the real substance or the real facts that we were looking for as far as the collusion between Trump and Russia, as far as the election is concerned. I haven't heard anything about that in the past 4 days, ever since this happened.
Yeah.
And I think
he's the master controlling the news cycle, William.
Pardon me?
He's the master of controlling the news cycle. He did it every day through the primary. He did it every day through the election. And he's done it virtually every day since he became president.
Yeah, but it speaks volumes as far as the news media, like MSNBC and CNN is concerned, because just think about this thing on the reverse. Nothing Clinton could have done or did do changed their attention span when it came to her when she was running for president. Everything that she did, tried to say right or do right, they just it was still all about her emails. So nothing is stopping them from talking about this issue as far as the FBI investigation. We haven't heard anything about the Senate or the House investigation. There's nothing stopping them from talking about this if they wanted to, other than the fact that the media is controlled by those who wants Trump in office, and that's the way I feel about it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. The Republican bias, let me rephrase that. The corporate bias of the corporate media is, of course, not surprising. The Republican Party's embrace of corporatism as their highest principle is obvious. So it shouldn't surprise us that the media embraces the Republicans and the Republican worldview. They're symbiotic, you know, and Democrats in many cases, not always, but more often than not, Democrats oppose that worldview, and they're more concerned about the general welfare and the public good than, you know, corporate profits, particularly news media profits.
Right. Maybe if I could make one more point,
if it's real quick,
get off the air. Yeah. As far as you know, I hear this thing. They talk about Obama joined the red line, and now Trump is showing heart, and he's showing that he's tough. You know, and I didn't realize that when in 2013, when that attack took place, and when Obama said he was drawing a red line in the sand, I didn't realize that somewhere within that point.
Yeah, William, I got to cut you off, but Obama took that to Congress, and Congress said no. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's check in with Talk Media News. TalkMediaNews.com, brought to you by GoatsForTheOldGoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, the title of which I'm brain farting on here. Victoria Jones, do you remember?
I don't.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
All right.
If I could help you, I would.
I had the paper, and it got relocated last week while I was out of town, so I was going to grab it, but. Anyhow, what's going on in the world today, Victoria? It's great to hear your voice.
Thank you so much. Neil Gorsuch, picked by Donald Trump, the president, and confirmed by the Republican-led Senate, was sworn in today as an associate Supreme Court justice. He was sworn in at the White House by Justice Anthony Kennedy. And he will, of course, have a quick impact on the court. There are 9 justices again, and he is a conservative in the mold of Antonin Scalia, who he replaced.
Actually, he's to the right of Scalia. If you look at the analysis the New York Times did last week.
Oh, really? Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. So he took his oath in a Rose Garden ceremony. With Trump watching on, and Trump made the point that I got it done in the first 100 days. You think that's easy? And Gorsuch said that he was humbled by the trust placed in him today, and he said, I will never forget that to whom much is given, much will be expected. And Trump said that he will decide cases not based on his personal preferences, but based on a fair and objective reading of the law.
Yeah, that's what John Roberts said, too, before he eviscerated the Civil Rights Act and chopped up Obamacare and made law, and it doesn't, don't get me started. Anyhow, thank you.
Anyway, he will be joining the court almost immediately. Thursday, they have a closed meeting to discuss cases, and he'll take part in the next round of oral arguments starting on April the 17th.
Okay.
There's a closely watched religious rights case on April the 19th in which a Missouri church is objecting to being frozen out of state funds for a playground project due to a state ban on providing public money to religious organizations. So that's going to be interesting. So he'll be part of that.
Yeah, I'd like to come up with another word or another phrase than religious rights, sort of like religious power grab, religious money grab, religious, I don't know. But anyway.
Religious something.
By the way, Ellen Ratner's book is titled Loving What You Do, The Elements of a Great Working Life.
There you go.
There you go. Thank you to Troy for that.
So foreign ministers from the Group of Seven, the G7, major industrialized nations, have been meeting in Italy today. They're meeting there again tomorrow. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is among them. They are looking to put pressure on Russia to break its ties with Syrian President Bashar Assad. The U.S. missile strikes on a Syrian air base last week in retaliation for an alleged chemical weapons attack on civilians is something that has raised expectations that President Trump is going to adopt what they are saying would be a tougher than expected stance with Russia. Now, British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson said something interesting. He said, what we're trying to do is to give Rex Tillerson the clearest possible mandate from us as the West, the UK, all of our allies here, to say to the Russians, because Tillerson's going to Moscow on Wednesday, this is your choice, stick with that guy, stick with that tyrant, or work with us to find a better solution.
But here's the problem. I mean, you know, Gaddafi was an evil, evil man. Saddam Hussein was a terrible tyrant. But look at what happened to those countries when we simply removed them. We have to have a much larger plan than just let's get rid of the bad guy.
Well, and I think some analysts are starting to say, which I don't think they did say at the time of the strike, what is the Trump administration's actual policy beyond the tactic of the attack and the strategy, whatever the strategy there was behind it? What is the administration's policy on Syria?
Yeah, see, I don't think that this was a tactic or a strategy. I think this was for domestic political consumption.
And it may have been, you know, it may have been.
Yeah.
We don't know. You know, it was what it was. It certainly had an impact.
Yes.
Now, the nations attending the G7 summit were not able to release a joint climate statement at the end of the meeting this week because the Trump administration is reviewing its policies. Energy Secretary Rick Perry attended the Energy Summit in Rome at the weekend, but Italian officials said the U.S. was not able to sign the joint declaration about shared economic goals.
Is that because the joint declaration includes the words climate change and Rick Perry's phobic about that?
Well, because they are actually reviewing their policies. They're reviewing many of their priorities. And so they're not prepared to sign it yet. Now, in a readout from the Rome meeting, Perry didn't address the issue regarding the joint climate statement or the Paris Agreement, but that's part of it. But he did reiterate his position that fossil fuels can still be used while the environment gets cleaner.
Right.
That's what they are saying.
Mm-hmm.
A big story that is not necessarily political, but it is big and it's all over everywhere, is the story of the passenger on a United Airlines flight from Chicago to Louisville who was dragged off, kicking and screaming, and maybe passing out because the flight was overbooked. Have you seen the video?
I have. I've seen it from two different angles. Was this guy, in fact, a physician who had to be with patients the next morning?
It hasn't been confirmed yet. He said that he was.
Right.
Whatever he was somebody who said he didn't want to go.
Right.
And was taken off.
And I also read a report that the reason why they used the computer to randomly select 4 people to throw off the plane was because there were 4 United employees who wanted to fly?
Yes, the flight was overbooked. They asked people to voluntarily give up their seats. Nobody would, so they said, we're going to use a computer. We're going to take people. Yes, they had to get people to Louisville, and the people were vilified when they got on board, those employees were.
You think? Victoria Jones, Talk Media News. Thank you, Victoria. It's always great talking with you.
Thank you.
We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeets.com. Today we're reading from my book, Rebooting the American Dream. This is Chapter 1, Bring My Job Home. And we're about halfway into the chapter here. It starts out with this section called The High Cost of Free Trade. During the 1930s, none of the Asian powerhouse economies had adopted American industrialization strategies. So when Franklin Roosevelt put money into workers' pockets and they bought toys or clothes or radios, all those items were made in Alabama or Connecticut or Michigan. Now they're made in China, which experienced a labor shortage in 2009, causing its average wage to increase from 80 cents an hour to $1.14 an hour, and its economy to grow by more than 8%. China has been following the lead of Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea during the past half-century and has become an industrial powerhouse as a result. And ironically, each of these countries got its strategy from us. George Washington's Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, proposed it in 1791. And by 1793, most of the parts of his report on the subject of manufactures had been instituted as a series of legislative and policy steps. And it didn't start with Hamilton. He was just building on King Henry VII's Tudor Plan of 1485, which turned England from a backwater state with raw wool as its chief export into a major developed state that was producing fine clothing and other textile products from wool. He accomplished this by severely restricting the export of wool from England, with high export tariffs, and restricting the import of finished woolen goods with high import tariffs. King Henry learned this from the Dutch. They copied the Romans, and the Romans got it from the Greeks 3,000 years ago. Nonetheless, President Obama continues to follow his predecessors, Bush Jr., Clinton, Bush Sr., and Reagan, all in the religious belief that free trade will save us all. It's all nonsense. Free trade is a guaranteed ticket to the poorhouse for any nation, and the evidence is overwhelming. Even the phrase free trade was introduced by King Henry VII back in the 1400s as something that England should encourage other countries to do while it maintained protectionism. A more contemporary example of the application of that wisdom can be seen in South Korea. In the 1960s, South Korea was an undeveloped nation whose major exports were human hair for wigs and fish, and whose average annual income was around $400 per working family. Today, it's a major industrial power with an average annual per capita income of more than $32,000, and it beats the United States in its rate of college attendance, exports, and lifespan. Korea did this by closing its economy and promoting its export industries. A decade earlier, Japan had done the same thing. 40 years earlier, Germany had done it. In July of 2009, with no evident irony or understanding of how South Korea went about becoming a modern economic powerhouse, President Obama lectured the countries of Africa during his visit to Ghana. As the New York Times reported, quote, Mr. Obama said that when his father came to the United States, his home country of Kenya had an economy about as large as that of South Korea per capita. Today, he noted, Kenya remains impoverished and politically unstable, while South Korea has become an economic powerhouse, end quote. In that day's newspaper, or the next day's newspaper, the lead editorial titled Tangled Trade Talks repeated the essence of the mantra of its confused op-ed writer, Thomas L. Friedman, that so-called free trade is the solution to a nation's economic ills. But South Korea did not ride the free trade train to success. South Korean economist Ha Joon Chang details South Korea's economic ascent in his 2007 book, Bad Samaritans, The Myth of Free Trade and the Secret History of Capitalism. In 1961, South Korea was, as the president said, as poor as Kenya, with an $82 per capita annual income and many obstacles to economic growth. South Korea's main exports were primary commodities such as tungsten, fish, and human hair for wigs. And that's how the Korean technology giant Samsung started, by exporting fish, fruits, and vegetables. Today, it's the world's largest conglomerate by revenue, $173 billion. By throwing out free trade and embracing protectionism during the 1960s, South Korea managed to do in 50 years what it took the United States 100 and Britain 150 years to do. After a military coup in 61, General Park Chung-hee implemented short-term plans for South Korea's economic development. He instituted the Heavy and Chemical Industrialization Program, and South Korea's first steel mill and modern shipyard went into production. South Korea also began producing its own cars and used import tariffs to discourage imports. Electronics, machinery, and chemical plants soon followed, all sponsored or subsidized and tariff protected by the government. Between 1972 and 1979, the per capita income grew more than 5 times. In addition, new protectionist slogans were adopted by South Korean citizens. For example, it was viewed as a civic duty to report anyone caught smoking foreign cigarettes. All the money made from exports went into developing industry. South Korea enacted import bans, high tariffs, and excise taxes on thousands of products. South Korea's transformation was, to quote Chang, as if Haiti had turned into Switzerland. This transformation was accomplished through protecting fledgling industries with high tariffs and subsidies, and only by gradually opening itself to global competition. In addition, the government ran or heavily funded many of the larger industries, at least until they were globally competitive. The government ran or regulated the banks and therefore the credit. It controlled foreign exchange and used its currency reserves to import machinery and industrial products. Now, I'm not suggesting that latter part for the United States, but the fact of the matter is that protecting your economy works. And we're basically the only developed country in the world that doesn't do it any longer. Rebooting the American Dream is the book.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Paul Buchheit. He is the contributing writer for Alternet, author of the new book, Disposable Americans, an adjunct professor at DePaul University, an advocate for social and economic justice. His website, youdeservefacts.org. And you can tweet him at @UsAgainstGreed. Paul, welcome to the program, or welcome back to the program.
Oh, thanks, Tom.
Great having you with us. You have been writing about our healthcare system, condemning thousands of Americans to an early death. In fact, that's the title of one of your recent Alternet pieces. Tell us about that.
Well, yes, that's one of the things I get into in my book, which is Disposable Americans. One, it really talks about kids, the elderly, women, workers, minorities, young adults, soldiers, and elderly. A section of my book gets into healthcare for the elderly and how they really, it's sort of a form of terrorism. I refer to it in my writing because terrorism is pretty much defined as an intentional means of disposing of people, and that's what happens with what's happening with our health care
to some political end, typically. So
yes,
yeah. So the title of your book is Disposable Americans. At what point in time did Americans become disposable, or has this been with us since the beginning? Is this just the modern day extension of what started out as slavery?
Well, that's an interesting question. Let me mention first that that title. I've had a number of people say to me, Paul, that's perfect timing for a title like that, Disposable Americans. But my answer now is I'd rather sell 0 books and have President Sanders in office. It's nice to have a book that's timely, but it's a shame that it has to be that way. But to answer your question, the book gets into the past and the present and the personal, so it does reach, into the past, the time of slavery and the time of war and the time of terrible working conditions for kids and women. You know, so it touches upon our. I guess the answer is that it's always been this way, and hopefully we all hope it'll change, but it just doesn't seem. It seems like the whole neoliberal concept is basically saying that they don't care about half of America or more, 2/3 of America.
Yeah, yeah. We just put a man on the Supreme Court who, when he was being questioned by Congress, refused to say that he thought that child labor laws were constitutional. He acknowledged that they were, settled law, as among other things, but refused to take the simple position that this was the right thing. I'm sure you're familiar with the court in the 20s and the 30s, and the battles that Franklin Roosevelt had that kind of resolved themselves in 37 when he threatened to change the makeup of the court. Do you see us revisiting that era?
Well, it's certainly true that I was watching, and I'm sure you also saw Al Franken when he was questioning Gorsuch about the truck driver that would have died if he didn't use a common sense or make a common sense decision and get the heck out of there and find warmth, And Gorsuch, right. It's like he's so keyed into the legality of things that we lose common sense, and we're seeing that all throughout the administration now. That with of course with climate denial and Steve Mnuchin just said, and this is closely related to my book about jobs. He said, "Oh, don't worry about the robots. It'll be 50 or 100 years before they have an impact." I mean, it's like there's no common sense thinking right now. It's like it's all based on law and changing the rules to make things easier for the rich.
I think virtually all of them were born rich. I don't think there's a single person in his cabinet, and certainly not Gorsuch, who ever had to stand in an unemployment line, who ever had to as I remember doing when I was 6 years old, go to we called it the cheese store, the surplus food store, because my dad, couldn't get a decent job at the time. He was selling encyclopedias door to door and just wasn't making it. The following year, he finally got a good union job and spent 40 years as a tool and die maker, which, threw us into the middle class. But I don't think that anybody in that cabinet, and frankly, I don't think anybody in the Republican Party has ever had that experience, or at least at the elected level. There seems to be a complete lack of empathy for the experience that most Americans have had.
Yes, I'm glad you used the word empathy. That's one of the areas that I'm very interested in. I've studied all the research about how the richer you get, the less empathy you have, the less you're able to connect. And that's certainly true in Congress, where and the cabinet, if you add up all their money, it's about equal to 85% of all the counties in America. I mean, it's just incredible. And they clearly, I mean, this is common sense if you think about it. If you're in Congress and you're dealing with lobbyists and you're being wined and dined every day, of course you want to help those people out and you relate to them, and you sort of lose sight of real Americans. And by real America, I'm talking about, it's more than half. I mean, last year, for example, the 1% was everybody talks about income, but it seems to me that wealth is a better barometer of what's happening in this country. And last year, only the 1% gained in wealth. Everybody else went backwards. So it's but Congress and the cabinet, they don't relate to people like this.
Yeah, it seems to me that this got really bad. I mean, I've been sort of watching politics. My father was very political, and so I grew up
I think, aware of politics in the 1950s and early 60s. And it really seems like we went nuts with the Reagan administration. That seems like a major inflection point. That was the point at which the beginning of the destruction of the middle class and the beginning of the rise of a genuine oligarchy started. Does your analysis comport with that?
Oh, absolutely. The Chicago boys, Milton Friedman, and then that ridiculous belief based on economist Arthur Laffer about how, it's like the neoliberals or the people in the Reagan era were just waiting for somebody to make this claim that if you cut my taxes, everybody's going to benefit. And it's so, yes, the answer is starting with Reagan or just before, things went, the country reversed itself. And it's incredible to me that after almost 40 years, there's still denial about that, that idea that cutting taxes is going to benefit everybody.
Well, and there's absolutely no discussion in the media about the failure of this bizarre pseudo-libertarian ideology or Ayn Rand or any of this kind of stuff. Paul, we're running out of time here. We're talking with Paul Buchheit. He is the author of a new book, Disposable Americans. Paul, what's in a nutshell? What solutions do you offer, or what do you have optimism?
Well, yes, I guess we have to, right? I certainly with the tremendous surge in alternative energy, I mean, that has to lead us into a happier path in the future. And then my book discusses guaranteed income. How when all these right-leaning people say, "Well, I did it myself," I'm a self-made man, usually men, and individualism. If you really think about it, and we people and progressives have thought about this, everything started with people working together. It's our tax money, our government institutions, DARPA, National Institutes of Health, everything in technology and medicine came out of that. The point is we all played a part. We all should benefit from this tremendous productivity in this country, but instead of just giving it to a small portion of people.
Amen. Paul Buchheit, his new book is Disposable Americans. And Paul is one of the most brilliant writers working in America today. Paul, I love your work. Thanks so much for being on the program with us today.
Thank you very much, Tom.
And we'll be back with your calls and more of the news of the day right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
7 House Republicans facing TV attacks. I'll tell you about that, and we'll pick up your calls there. And welcome back. David in Los Angeles, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
Excellent programming.
Thank you.
Boy, I wish to God you could be catapulted right over into primetime CNN or MSNBC.
That ain't going to happen. I had a talk with the folks at one of those networks, and I said I would like editorial independence, and they said, then you're not going to get a job here.
Well, their loss and our loss. But anyhow, I'm in California, as you know, L.A., and I've received one of those camera tickets from the crossing as well as the so-called fast track we have out here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this thing with capitalism, like we're in so-called progressive California, where the governor and pretty much our whole assembly is Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
And most of California is pretty much under corporate control, even here in corporate California. Most of our work, infrastructure work is bidded out to private contractors, right? And as an aside, like the simpleton or the simple people who get their talking points from Fox, where this guy called in that. Now, you are perhaps aware that since the launch in Syria, Raytheon's also launched the day after for the stock value is concerned.
Sure.
And not to mention, oil prices are beginning to surge now.
Yep.
So this notion of corporate control is, I think we're going to have to be rigorously honest about the two-party system and how they are complicit in allowing this type of corporate dominance over the American society. You're right on point as it relates to this capitalist cancer that has pretty much become malignant. And I don't know, other than perhaps, like I said, dumping you over into CNN and the people of like minds in the MSNBC, where we can begin to start creating an immune system, meaning becoming aware of what exactly is happening here. Because the minds of Americans are being controlled by the corporate media, which gives us this jingoistic generals coming on and hyping up war and all of these other distractions and whatnot. Right. Until I know you want to be optimistic about the so-called Democratic progressives, if you will, but like I said, I'm living in progressive California, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody's a Democrat. But we have, you should come out here and I'd give you a tour of the homeless problem we have out here.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is just unimaginable. You would have to see it to believe it.
Yep.
Right? And so all of our so-called progressive energies, our so-called elected officials, are under the influence.
Yeah, no, I think to a large extent, David, you're right. We've got a lot of work to do. Thank you.
This year's election results have generated fear, sadness, and despair.
In the days and months ahead,
our democracy may face a crisis of historic proportions.
But there is good news.
There is good news.
There is good news. Thousands of people are stepping forward in solidarity, resistance,
and resolve.
We join them.
We join them.
We join them
in standing with the most vulnerable communities among us.
Those most likely to be targeted by new restrictions and policies.
We will tell their stories here.
Here
on Free Speech TV.
We will lift their voices here.
Here on Free Speech TV.
In the difficult times ahead, know that we will be with you
24 hours a day.
Every day.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
You are not alone.
There are millions of us.
Raising our voices and hearts together as one.
We've got your back.
We got your back.
Free Speech TV's got your back.
The revolution is in progress.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Yeah, this is really interesting. A group called Save My Care, backed by labor and progressive groups, is spending more than $1 million on advertising, television advertising, that highlight how 7 vulnerable Republicans voted basically to screw all of us, to just destroy our healthcare system. And repeatedly, by the way, those Republicans, Mike Kaufman of California, Republican Carlos Curbelo of Florida, Republican Darrell Issa of California, Republican Tom MacArthur of New Jersey, Republican Brian Mast of Florida, Republican Martha McSally of Arizona, and Republican David Valadao, I hope I'm not mispronouncing, of California.
And these are all people who, they ultimately, Ryan pulled the so-called American Health Care Act, the Republican, let's destroy Obamacare and wipe out Medicaid and shorten the lifespan of Medicare. This was, Paul Ryan's thing. He pulled this before they could actually have a vote on it. But all of these people said that they were going to vote for it. And one ad shared this, Mike DeBonis in today's Washington Post. One ad shared with the Washington Post targeting ISA highlights figures from the Congressional Budget Office report on an earlier version of the GOP bill, which predicted short-term premium increases and coverage losses reaching 24 million people after 10 years. The ad also cites a massive age tax, a Democratic talking point that references the Republican bill's effects on those between 50 and 64. And it says, Daryl, tell ISA, stop trying to repeal our health care. This is interesting. This is going to get real interesting. I see some stuff coming. Another thing I wanted to share with you, I got this from Debbie Stabenow's office. And I was really impressed by this. It's titled "A Special Report: How Republicans Are Selling You Out to the Special Interests," and it just goes through the list. There used to be this thing called the Cardin-Lugar Amendment. It was an anti-corruption rule, and I'll just read from the press release here. Before Republicans killed it, the rule would have exposed and helped stop corrupt practices that lead to greater risk, more instability, and higher costs for American investors. Required oil and mining companies to disclose payments they make to governments to extract their natural resources. 30 other countries, including the entire European Union, the UK, and Canada, all require this. We don't anymore. The Republicans don't want you to know. Who pays the cost? Now that the rule has been rolled back, American investors like pension plans and others who might have saved billions. Researchers by two leading petroleum economists, quote, conclude that increased transparency resulting from the disclosures required by the Cardin-Lugar rule, this is the rule that the Republicans pulled back, could lower the cost of capital for covered companies by $6 to $12 billion. American taxpayers might have saved billions due to reduced corruption. Americans and our allies abroad, the one campaign estimates that 3.6 million deaths could have been prevented by strengthening transparency and fighting corruption in poor and developing countries. The Global Financial Integrity Non-Governmental Organization, NGO, found that developing countries lose $1 trillion a year to crime, corruption, and tax evasion, and this rule would have significantly curtailed that loss. But hey, Republicans, they say crime, corruption, hey, no problem. We're okay. The second one, selling out Americans' consumers, broadband privacy rules. We did this like crazy a week and a half ago. After Republicans killed these rules, broadband providers will now be able to collect, use, and sell your personal internet information without your consent. Who pays the cost now that these rules have been rolled back? You and me, American consumers who now have no rights in the face of broadband companies that want to exploit your sensitive personal information. That's just page 2 of 6. There's just a pile of stuff. And did you hear about the brain parasite that is spreading? I'm wondering if it's gotten to the White House. I'll tell you about that after the break, and we'll pick up your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Whatever topic you'd like to discuss, I'm here. We'll talk. And welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club, Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America by Michael Eric Dyson, who was a guest on our program a while back. This is from page 86. One of the great privileges of whiteness is not to see color, not to see race, and not to pay a price for ignoring it, except, of course, when you're called on it. But even then, the price pales quite literally in comparison to the high price black folk pay for being black. We pay a price too.
for not even being able to derive recognition and financial reward for the styles that make the world want to be black so bad that they don't mind looking like us as long as they never ever have to be us. If the appropriators can freely rip off our culture with no consequences, those who revise racial history, the fourth stage of white racial grief, are even less accountable for their deeds. The way of the racial revisionist when it comes to black life and history is simply to rewrite it. Their motto is, it didn't happen that way. There's a flood of writing that tells us that the Civil War wasn't really about slavery, but about an effort to defend states' rights. But, my friend, you've got to put yourself in our place and see the absurdity of such a claim. Defend the rights of states to do what? To enslave blacks. But even here, the irresistible logic of whiteness, that is irresistible to whites themselves, and to all of us who are subjected to white whim, springs into full action. White American history is so powerful that even when it loses, it wins, at least in skirmishes within whiteness itself. From the right wing, there is the belief that the Civil War was fought over the ability of individual states to beat back a federal government out to impose its will. From the left wing, there's the belief that the Civil War was a conflict between the planter class and the proletariat. In each case, race as the main reason for the war is skillfully rewritten, or really written out. Slavery is rewritten too. Some white Christian apologists contend that black folk needed slavery to save their souls or to rescue their cultures. A contemporary twist on this argument radiates in thinkers like Dinesh D'Souza, who claims that American blacks brought here through slavery are now doing far better than their African kin. Some white critics argue that since blacks sold other blacks into slavery, bondage was a black man's problem, not a white man's burden. But revisionists would much rather describe the dehumanization of black folk as little more than a commercial transaction. It's another way of washing their hands of racial responsibility. The effort to rewrite history surfaces in how Malcolm X is treated in the mainstream. It hardly seems likely that the culture he fought with all his heart could be depended on to grasp his true meaning. Malcolm is often read as an apostle of violence, as a frightful figure consumed by destructive rage. Yet the truth is far more complex, and Malcolm was far more complicated. But isn't the autobiography of Malcolm X so enduringly appealing because it shows Malcolm giving up hatred as a means to racial justice? Now, Malcolm X believed in the liberation of black folk from the mental and psychological chains of white supremacy. He was not committed to nonviolence as a way of life or as a method of social strategy. He believed that such a commitment prevents the full realization of black emancipation. Yet he was not personally violent. As Ossie Davis says in his eulogy, responding to the claim that Malcolm preached hate and was a fanatic and a racist, quote, "Did you even talk to Brother Malcolm? Was he ever himself associated with violence or any public disturbance?" End quote. The rage that flowed in Malcolm's veins was the rage against a force of whiteness that aimed to wash its black kin from the face of the earth. The urge to rewrite black history occasionally gives way to the final stage of white racial grief, which is simply, when it comes to race, dilute it. That is, to argue that black stuff doesn't just plague black folk. To summarize, bad stuff happens to everyone. This argument surfaced in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and that storm certainly hit black folk, but it hit white folk too. This is the sordid version of reverse American exceptionalism. It is the same Me Too impulse that flares in the bitter battle against affirmative action. Beloved, I can't help but notice that affirmative action is the bee in so many of your bonnets. You look around in your classrooms and you think every black person is there because they got an unfair shake from the system. You look at your job and you think that your black coworker got an unjust nod of approval from the powers that be. You never stop to think how the history of whiteness in America is one long scroll of affirmative action. You never stop to think that Babe Ruth never had to play the greatest players of his generation, just the greatest white players. You never stop to think that most of our presidents never rose to the top because they bested the competition, only just the white competition. White privilege is a self-selecting tool that keeps you from having to compete with the best. The history of white folk gaining access to Harvard, Princeton, or Yale is the history of white folk deciding ahead of the game that you are superior. You argue that slots in school should be reserved for your kin because, after all, they are smarter, more disciplined, better suited, and more deserving than inferior blacks. That's like concluding that the Cleveland Cavaliers can't possibly win the NBA championship because they're down 3-1 to the Golden State Warriors. Throw in the towel and call it a series. but they must play the series to determine the winner. Whiteness is having all the advantages on your side. The referee's blowing the whistle for you. The arena packed with only your fans. In fact, whiteness means you never even have to play the game at all, at least not in head-to-head matchups with the talent and skill of black folks. Here's We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Yeah, I mentioned this before the break. There is this parasite. It's called the rat lungworm. That doesn't sound good. I mean, there's like no part of that sounds good, right? And it's a rare parasitic infection, and it is spreading across the. In fact, the exact. This is from Rhett Jones over at. What site is this? I don't know. I thought this was in progress, but I'm not sure. I don't have the. In any case, Rhett Jones wrote the article. Health officials in Hawaii have been warning residents not to touch snails or slugs because of an increase in cases of people coming into contact with a rare parasitic infection known as rat lungworm. Experts are blaming its sudden spread across the United States on climate change and globalization. Other states it has recently popped up in include California, Alabama, Louisiana, and Florida. The first known case was in 1944 in Taiwan, but it spread to the U.S. by way of rats in cargo ships. Astrigionales canantosis begins its life as an infection in a rat's lung, blood, and brains. You know, I'm not going to go through the whole life cycle, but, by the time it gets to us, it gets into our brains. It causes meningitis, tremors, pain, inflammation, and it can be fatal. Maui News reported on a recent cases this week and spoke with local residents about the spread of this invasive semi-slug on the island and the infectious disease it carries. And they interviewed a teacher who actually has it. She says, the parasites are in the lining of my brain moving around. It's unbelievable. But hey, there's no such thing as climate change. It's not spreading weird diseases around the world. It's nothing to worry about. It's all good, right? Dan in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how are you, Tom? Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I'm a plaintiff's trial lawyer in St. Louis. I've been involved in some class actions, but I wouldn't categorize myself as a class action lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if they pass this law that says that they can sell your private information, that's ripe for class action because they're selling my information. It's not theirs; it's mine. And so if they sell it, I think they can be sued so that we could. So that you can recover whatever profits they made on that sale.
I guarantee you, Dan, that the new terms of service that you will agree to, with a shrink wrap click with your ISP, explicitly state that it's not your information anymore; it's now their information.
Well, and what I would argue to that is that there's no consideration for that clause in that contract, and it's not valid.
Well, the consideration that would be. In exchange for your paying them and giving them access to your information, they will provide you with access to the internet.
Well, what I would suggest is that everybody who signs those contracts from this point forward, scratch out that.
But you can't sign it. It's a box you click.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, Dan, you're the lawyer. I'm not. But
Yeah.
I wish it would work.
Well, I think there's, like I said, I don't classify myself as a class action lawyer, and I slept through contracts class in law school. But I would, I would suggest that there's some high power class action people out there who could file the lawsuit and have that clause made invalid under some legal theory. So I mean, I think it's going to happen in any event, but. I think it may be risky for them to
let's hope so. In the meantime, it's a good time to invest in a VPN company.
Dan, I got to move along, but thanks for the call and thanks for listening to Sirius XM. Vicky in Muskegon, Michigan. Hey, Vicky, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call, and
Sure.
thank you and Louise for your work.
Thank you.
I have a question,
Mhm.
but I quickly want to add to the issue of privatization. Governor Engler privatized our road crews, our state road crews. People had good jobs, state jobs, and they had bad jobs. Pretty soon they didn't have insurance. A lot of this falls back on the taxpayer, on the state.
Yep.
And it's a big transfer of wealth.
Yeah. And now you've got a whole bunch of private companies doing the road work that used to be good government jobs, but those private companies make a nice profit, and out of that profit, they kick the money back to the Republican politicians who changed the laws.
Absolutely. And gerrymander.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
But you wanted to talk about North Korea and nuclear weapons?
Yeah. 2 weeks ago, I think it was, you were talking, you had a caller you were talking to regarding nukes that were on B-52s being loaded and taken to South Korea, and it wasn't being reported.
No, wait a second. Those were not nukes. Those were anti-ballistic missiles, anti-missile missiles.
Okay. Because I had listened over and over, and I've tried to find information, and I couldn't find anything.
No. The goal. First of all, both China and North Korea objected to our citing those in South Korea, but we did it anyway, and I agree with that decision to do so. And secondly, what these missiles do is they take out other missiles. That's the good news. The bad news is, they're only maybe 50 to 60% effective. So, we'll see how it works. But that was the situation.
Better than nothing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So, Vicki, thank you very much for the call. I'm sorry if I was vague or less than clear a week and a half ago. I was thinking about going on vacation. Gary in Stevenson, Washington. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind?
Okay, Tom.
Hey, Gary.
Yes, I have a friend that lives in Roatan.
Oh, really?
And I have never had the opportunity to make it over there myself.
Uh-huh.
But I was kind of curious what your take was on that clear water and warm and.
Oh, I loved it. We stayed at a place called Sea Grape Plantation that I would recommend over any place that one of the best vacations I've ever had my whole entire life. In fact, we asked about going back next March, and they said the entire month is already booked up. Like 80-90% of their business is repeat business. It's just wonderful. And there's a restaurant, and it's a B&B. They have three bedrooms and a little restaurant that seats maybe 20 downstairs that is owned by this British guy and his chef, who's a Honduran guy. And it's called the Lily Pad Cafe or the Lily Pad B&B. And that was one of the best meals I've ever had in my life was there. It was just a spectacular time. We had a wonderful time.
All right. Well, I may make the trip myself. Thank you for the info.
You're welcome, Gary. Gary, be sure to check out Sea Grapes, though. They're and Lily Pad. Those two things are worth the trip just in and of themselves. Gary, thanks for the call. Bob in South Dennis, Massachusetts. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Yes. Hi, Tom. I just wanted to let you and your listeners know about something sort of refreshing. Democratic Senators Presser of Delaware and Cantwell of Washington State recently sent the Army Corps of Engineers a request for documentation on the details that had that environmental study that Obama ordered and Trump had halted. As you know, the mainstream media did nothing on this story. I mean, zero.
Right.
And I got this from Chase Iron Eyes, who's an attorney with the Lakota People's Law Project, which is a site that anyone who's still interested in knowing what's going on with the Dakota Access Pipeline, you can subscribe to his newsletter and his emails. I can't recommend it enough, but they have demanded details because there's illegalities there. Once that environmental study was started, that is supposed to continue to completion. I am hoping that there's accountability, and please, I'm hoping the media will cover this. And I can't thank those senators enough.
I'm with you, Bob. Do you have a link that you want to share with people about how they can get more information?
Just Google Lakota People's Law Project, and you should be able to.
Lakota, L-A-K-O-T-A, People's Law Project.
Yep, Lakota People's Law Project. It's a fantastic site. And just very quickly, because I know you have other callers, if you ever had a chance to get Tim Wise, Peggy McIntosh, or Jane Elliott on any of your programs to talk on white privilege, I would be ecstatic. They are incredible to talk about, a subject that, thank goodness, you brought to light.
Yeah, interesting. I'm not familiar with any of those names. If you could post that on our blog on our homepage at thomhartmann.com, I'll pull that off and do some digging into it. Okay, Bob?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And a special hi to everybody in the chat room. We changed computers last week, and I have not been able to track down the URL for the chat room. Sue, send it to me, and I'll get in there. And welcome back. Let's see here. Elizabeth watching us on Free Speech TV in Farmington, Michigan. Hey, Elizabeth, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. Thanks for getting me on. I was calling in response. There was a conversation about being able to set up a class action lawsuit. The lawyer. Okay, here's how that would work, I believe, is that anytime you go and enter an agreement, a contractual agreement, you have to enter into it freely. Not only where both of you are compensated, but and my proof of that is that you can't be held to a contractual agreement if you're not, quote, in your right mind. You know, you have to be in sound mind. So in this case, you can't use the services that you're paying for unless you agree in that click box to give up your rights. Well, that's not a free. That's not entering into a contractual agreement freely.
I agree with you, but the Supreme Court ruled in a case that had to do with class actions, and I'm sorry I don't remember the name of the case. But this was one of these 5-4 cases, in fact, that Sheldon Whitehouse talked about when he was berating Gorsuch in his opening arguments or his opening statements. Basically, and this had to do with forced arbitration and blowing up or reducing your ability to participate in class actions. In fact, I think there was 2 cases actually, one for each of those 2 topics. And basically, the Supreme Court has said, if you enter into an agreement with a corporation, you entered into that agreement. Sorry, you used the product, you're toast.
Well, I bet it could be argued, and I think there'd be plenty of case law that would back up the idea that that is not a free contractual, each party is not free to walk away. If you walk away, then you're not able to use the services you're paying for.
Yeah. Well, and perhaps the one area in all this where it seems to me that there may be a legal hole that you could go through to get it is if you live in an area where there is only one internet service provider, and so they are functionally a monopoly. Then you may be able to make the argument that you don't have a choice, and therefore you have to go with that provider. But increasingly now, because of the ubiquity of cell phone service, and now you've got cell phone companies that are offering internet service. You can buy these little packages, the dongles and packages and whatnot that you can plug into your computer and get your cell phone off the internet. It's slower, but hey, it's the internet. That may even blow up my theoretical argument.
Well, if they also force you, if you can only do it by making that agreement, that clickbox agreement, every time you go in to use what you're paying for, regardless of who the carrier is, to me that seems like you're kept from freely walking away.
I agree. And
I think that guy's on to something. A class action.
I sure hope so. I sure hope so. And
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Bye-bye.
Have a great afternoon. We'll see. I mean, this is one of those areas where the Roberts Court has been one of the most corporate friendly courts, since the 20s.
And now we've got Gorsuch on it, who is to the right of Scalia. So expect to see challenges to everything from child labor laws to the right to unionize to the, you know, your ability to challenge a corporation on anything. I think that we are entering an era now, and if they get one more vote, you know, if Kennedy or Ruth Bader Ginsburg retire, or God forbid something else happens, it's going to be tough. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Wayne in Bronx, New York. Hey, Wayne, what's up?
Hey, what's going on there, Tom?
I'm here. What's on your mind?
I just want to. What's on my mind is that the mainstream media is not bringing up or asking Mitch the hard questions about what happened if there's a Supreme Court position comes available in Trump's last year in office. Is the Republicans going to say no? He can't fill it. You know?
I must have missed a word there. What? And in fact, I had to put my IFB in a little tighter here, my headphone.
Okay.
What specifically are you talking about, Wayne?
Like the Supreme Court slot that was just filled by that corporate-friendly justice.
Yeah, Gorsuch. Yeah.
By Gorsuch. Right. My question is this: I noticed that the mainstream media is not asking Mitch McConnell to ask the hard questions like, what happened if there's a seat comes available in Trump's last year in office?
Right.
And are they going to say he cannot fill it?
I guarantee you they won't. They're just making this stuff up as they go along, and it's all about raw power and raw money, and it's all they're being told what to do by the billionaires in charge. That's what's going on. That's what's going on.
I like to add this. I just retired from the Army about going on 4 years now. And from what I've seen for the battle damage assessment from those 58 $1 million missiles that was fired, it was minimum damage. Those missiles was programmed so they will hit specific areas and cause the minimum amount of damage. That was only for show.
Yeah, I agree. This was Trump. This was Trump. Like he wears his ties long to compensate. This was Trump compensating, in my opinion.
Yes, 58 missiles should have obliterated that base.
Yeah.
I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
I know that for a fact because I spent 24 years in the military. Yeah. 58 cruise missiles, high-yield warhead missiles, conventional warhead missiles that base should not be on the earth no more.
Yeah, there shouldn't be any runways, there shouldn't be any buildings, and there shouldn't be any planes, and there are all of the above. So what Trump was doing was just, he was doing, one of those things. He was, this was not it was a serious thing. 8 or 9 people died as a result of these strikes. So, this does not represent a strategy. It is not a reasonable tactic. It was for U.S. PR consumption, in my opinion. Wayne, thanks for the call, and thanks for sharing your experience with us. I appreciate it. Bob in San Luis Obispo, California. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm just curious why the conservatives, and by extension the conservative, mostly leaning media, forgets that when President Clinton back in 1998 or 99 tried to take out bin Laden, he was, quote, accused of, quote, lobbing a few cruise missiles over there.
Right. They also said he was wagging the dog in order to stop the Lewinsky investigation because he threw 3 cruise missiles into bin Laden's camp.
And how about the irony of the replacement cost for those missiles equaling what the Secret Service just requested to increase for their security coverage for Trump and his family?
Yeah, it's crazy stuff. It's crazy stuff. Bob, thank you for pointing those things out. They're important things for not to go down the memory hole. Well said. Chuck in Reddick, Illinois. Hey, Chuck, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I called once before to ask you about this on Anything Goes Day, and I'm a little excited about it because I think it could be a good thing for Illinois. Christopher Kennedy is going to take on Bruce Rauner for governor of Illinois. And I'm wondering if you know anything about Chris. I know a little bit about him from what I've read on the internet, but I'm wondering if what you think about it, if we have a chance. And
I don't know anything about Chris Kennedy, frankly, Chuck. I'm sorry, but I do know the difference between a Republican and a Democrat. And you've got a billionaire Republican running Illinois right now, and he's not doing the stuff that should be done to help the people.
Yes, I agree with you, and I'm kind of excited, obviously, because of the Kennedy name, and I'm hoping that we can get Bruce Rauner out and that Chris can do something good for us here in Illinois.
Well, let's hope. Let's hope, Chuck. I'm sorry I don't have the data right at the fingertips, but I'll look into it. I'll check it out. Chuck, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Jamie in Birmingham, Michigan. Hey, Jamie, what's up?
Yeah, hi. Oh, I love that Chris Kennedy, he got some attention when they were trying to destroy the healthcare system. He sounded just like Ted. Standing up for the people's health care. And he's really good looking, too, that old Kennedy good.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
It doesn't hurt.
Him. You were talking about vacations in the show. I don't have any insight, but I'm just in solidarity with you. I would get antsy after a few days, too.
Oh.
And I would just probably bring a bunch of stuff to catch up on my reading or something.
Yeah,
I can't sleep when I'm away from home. That's my problem. On vacation and I can't sleep.
I had the same problem, Jamie. I had the same. I read 3 novels while I was there, and I read half of them in the middle of the night.
Yeah. So that's a problem. But oh my God, the parasites, the brain. We have so many garden slugs here. Now I'm going to have to watch out for
Well, they're not in Michigan yet. They're in tropical places. Hawaii, Florida, Louisiana. So I don't think you have to worry about the slugs there.
So what you were saying about the greedy corporations now messing with our traffic lights and making driving even more dangerous, that's like the final straw for me. Yeah. I haven't driven in a few years because I'm trying to get out of some debt. I haven't had a car. But it was bad enough when people were driving me off the road and talking on their cell phones and texting. But now they're messing with traffic lights. It's just unbelievable. But I heard a program on Sunday morning. A big thing now that's coming are these driverless vehicles, including like semi-trucks and taxis and everything. And not only will that put hundreds of thousands of people out of work, and like your author said, that was a great interview about how we're going to have a guaranteed income pretty soon for people.
I agree.
There will be no jobs. But I work on computers as an occupation, and if there's one thing I know about computers is they're not infallible and they have glitches. So I'm trying to imagine myself being a human being driving a car in the midst of all these computer-run vehicles having who knows what kind of glitches. I just don't know if I'm going to get a car again.
Yeah. I do. We lived here in D.C. for 5 years without a car. We finally got one last year because Louise got the dog, and you got to have a car to take the dog around. But public transportation and walking are great things. Jamie, thanks for the call. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. Thank you all for being with us today. It's been a marvelous day. I'm so glad to be back. And we've got a lot of challenges in this world, but we have a lot of opportunities. Even with that crazy orange guy in the White House, we still have a lot of opportunities and a lot of work to do. So, step up, right? Democracy is not a spectator sport. It takes all of us. That includes you. You're it. See you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets.
And they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit freespeechbeats.com.